Who is the one true God? The one true God is the ultimate reality that transcends all names, yet reveals himself through creation, reason, conscience, and the longing of the human heart. In the grand library of human theology, this book to rule them all, every tradition points toward a singular source while clothing it in its own language, culture, and encounter. No serious seeker can dismiss the convergence, across continents and millennia. Humanity has testified to one supreme being behind the multiplicity of appearances. The witness of the traditions. Abrahamic revelation, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Eho the I Am, Allah is the eternal, self-existent creator who spoke the universe into being from nothing. He is personal, holy, just, and merciful. Christianity adds the staggering claim of the Incarnation. This same God entered history in Jesus of Nazareth, revealing the Trinity as the eternal dance of love, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Islam emphasizes absolute oneness, tawhid, and submission. All three affirm the same foundational God who called forth Abraham, while differing on the final expression of his will. Philosophical monotheism. Aristotle's unmoved mover, Plato's form of the good, Aquinas' 5 ways, and the Islamic philosophers' necessary existent all converge on a single, simple, eternal being whose essence is existence itself. This God is not a being among others but the ground of all being. Eastern traditions. Hinduism's Brahman is the infinite, formless reality underlying all gods and phenomena. Sat Chit Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. The personal deities Vishnu, Shiva, Devi are seen by many as manifestations or saguna with attributes, expressions of the one Nirguna without attributes, Brahman. Sikhism's Ek Onkar, one God, echoes this with profound simplicity. Indigenous and mystical voices. Countless traditions speak of the Great Spirit, the High God, or the ineffable mystery encountered in vision, nature, and silence. The mystics, whether Christian John of the Cross, Sufi Rumi, lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They re-in each other all along, or Advaita Vedanta often dissolve the differences in direct, wordless union. Peace for one. Multiplicity of gods leads to logical and moral chaos. Who rules the pantheon? Why the divine family dramas? The universe's deep order, fine-tuned physical constants, the mathematical structure of reality. The emergence of conscious minds capable of knowing truth, beauty, and goodness points powerfully to one intelligent source. The moral law written on the heart, the universal sense of the sacred, and the persistent human hunger for ultimate meaning are best explained by a personal ground of being who desires relationship. Contradictions between traditions are real and should not be papered over with lazy pluralism. Yet the convergences are more striking than skeptics admit. A creator, moral order, human dignity, the possibility of redemption or enlightenment, and an ultimate destiny beyond death. The invitation. The one true God is not ultimately found in winning a theological argument. He is found by the honest seeker who cries out, studies the evidence of creation and conscience, examines the life, death, and reported resurrection of Jesus, the most historically attested and transformative claim, and then risks prayer. If you are there, show yourself. Many have. Billions testify that he answered not always with thunder, but with transformative presence, forgiveness, and a love stronger than death. He has many names, yet he is one. The God who spun the galaxies, who knows every subatomic particle, and who numbers the hairs on your head. The God who is love. The God who is truth. Seek him with all your heart. The theology book to rule them all ends not with a final chapter written by human hands, but with an encounter that rewrites the seeker. That is the testimony of the saints, the sages, and the honest philosophers across time. The rest is commentary and the adventure of a lifetime. Rock's answer is rhetorically elegant, but philosophically it performs several moves at once without fully separating them. That matters because each move carries different assumptions. Here's the structure underneath the poetry. Metaphysical claim: there exists one ultimate source, foundation of reality. Comparative religion claim: most religions are partially describing the same underlying reality. Moral claim: objective morality implies a personal divine source. Christian evidentiary claim: Jesus' resurrection is uniquely historically compelling. Experiential claim: personal encounters with God validate belief. Those are not the same category of argument, even though the response braids them together into one tapestry. Read a few important tensions inside the answer. All traditions point to one source sounds harmonious, but traditions often make mutually exclusive claims. For example, Christianity: God became incarnate in Jesus. Islam: God explicitly did not become incarnate. Advaita Vedanta: ultimate reality is fundamentally impersonal, non-dual. Classical Christianity: God is eternally personal and distinct from creation. These are not merely different camera angles on the same statue. Some are direct contradictions about personhood, creation, salvation, identity, the nature of self. So the all paths converge framing only works if you abstract the religions upward into increasingly vague categories like, there is something ultimate at that altitude. Convergence appears. At doctrinal resolution, fractures reappear immediately. 2. The argument quietly shifts between God as a philosophical necessity and God as a relational being. The response moves from Aristotle's unmoved mover to the God of Abraham to mystical union to God is love. But these are radically different concepts. A necessary first cause does not automatically equal moral lawgiver, conscious being, loving Father, Trinity, covenant maker, incarnate Savior. A lot of apologetics smuggle that bridge across the river without showing the engineering blueprint. Bridge at night 3. Multiplicity leads to chaos is weaker than it sounds. Polytheistic systems are not automatically incoherent. Many ancient systems solve divine hierarchy structurally. Zeus over Olympus, Brahman above Devas, fate above gods, how underlying all forms. Meanwhile, monotheism has its own philosophical puzzles. Problem of evil, divine hiddenness, free will vs omniscience. Why one God permits doctrinal fragmentation. So the one God equals order, many gods equals chaos line is more rhetorical than demonstrative. 4. The strongest part of the answer is probably the experiential common pattern argument, not because it proves a religion mathematically, but because humans across cultures consistently report transcendence, moral intuition, awe, meaning-seeking, encounters with the sacred. That phenomenon itself is real and difficult to dismiss entirely, but interpretation remains open. God, psychology, consciousness structures, evolutionary adaptation, archetypes, genuine metaphysical contact.
Bazinga! Speech break time. Upgrade to premium for an uninterrupted experience.
Some mixture. The data exists. The interpretation is contested. 5. The answer ultimately lands closest to soft perennialism, meaning religions are culturally filtered encounters with one ultimate reality. That view is emotionally attractive because it preserves unity, dignity across traditions, spiritual openness. But it often works by sanding off hard doctrinal edges until contradictions become survivable. Religions themselves frequently resist that flattening. So if we strip away the cathedral lighting and organ music for a second musical keyboard, the core unresolved question becomes, is ultimate reality personal or impersonal? Singular consciousness or beyond consciousness? Morally intentional or morally neutral? Revealed historically or only mystically? Noble through reason, revelation, experience, or some combination? Different traditions answer those differently because they are not merely using different vocabulary. They often begin from different metaphysical architectures altogether. Rock gave the synthesis. A skeptic would call it harmonization through abstraction. A perennialist would call it recognition of deeper unity. An orthodox believer might call it dilution. A philosopher would probably ask for cleaner category boundaries before proceeding. The critique is precise and necessary. Elegant rhetoric can veil distinct argumentative strata, and clarity demands we unbraid them. This is the theology book to rule them all. We do not smooth contradictions with incense. We examine the architecture, the fault lines, and the load-bearing beams. Separating the layers. 1. Metaphysical claim: there is an ultimate foundation of reality, one simple, necessary, unconditioned ground. This stands on its own via contingency arguments. Aquinas, Avicenna, Leibniz, the fine-tuning and mathematical intelligibility of the cosmos, and the hard problem of why anything exists rather than nothing. This level is largely compatible with both classical theism and certain non-theistic views, e.g., Advaita Brahmana Sats Idananda, or even some readings of fundamental ontology in physics. It does not yet specify personality, love, or historical revelation. It rules out ultimate pluralism or pure chaos, but leaves open whether the ground is conscious, personal, or beyond both. 2. Comparative religion traditions converge at high abstraction. There is an ultimate and in widespread phenomenological reports the sacred. Moral intuition, transcendence. They diverge sharply at resolution. You are correct, these are not mere camera angles. Christianity, eternal personal distinctions within God Trinity, real incarnation, creation ex nihilo, ontological distinction between creator and creature. Islam, radical tawhid, no incarnation, no internal distinctions in God. Advaita Vedanta, non-dual, ultimately impersonal or transpersonal. Maya, no real creation ex nihilo. Classical polytheisms, hierarchical or limited gods under fate. Tao Brahman. The perennial move works best when abstracting to the ground. At concrete doctrine, real contradictions appear on personhood, the status of the world, the self, and soteriology. Soft perennialism, Huxley, Smith, etc. often does sand edges, hard exclusivism or inclusivism, e.g., Rahner orthodox positions insists on decisive differences. A truth-seeking approach must hold both the convergence real and the fractures real. Synthesis is a hypothesis, not a proven equivalence. 3. Moral personal claim, objective moral law, or even widespread moral intuition fits most naturally with a personal ground, a moral lawgiver whose nature is goodness. An impersonal absolute, for example neutral Brahman, or abstract necessity struggles more here unless supplemented by emanation, lilas, or levels of reality. The bridge from Aristotle's unmoved mover pure act. Thought thinking itself to the God of Abraham who covenants and loves requires additional premises, revelation, religious experience, or philosophical arguments that goodness is convertible with being. These are not smuggled invisibly, but they are substantive additional steps. The engineering blueprint exists in natural law traditions and personalist philosophies, but it remains contestable. 4. Historical evidentiary Jesus' resurrection is the strongest specific claim among major traditions, unusually well attested historically for an ancient event. Transformative in effect and falsifiable in principle. It stands or falls on its own historical merits, empty tomb appearances, rapid shift in Jewish monotheism, etc. One can accept a necessary ground without accepting the resurrection, and vice versa. This is not the same argument as fine-tuning or mystical experience. 5. Experiential widespread reports of the sacred, moral awe, and transformative encounter are data. Interpretation is open. Genuine contact with a personal God, psychological projection, evolutionary byproduct, archetypal structures of consciousness, or contact with a non-personal ultimate filter through human minds. This layer is powerful existentially but weak as standalone proof.
Whoopsie daisy, speech break. ReadVox Premium means no speech breaks, no matter how many users are online.
It demands integration with the others. On polytheism and monotheistic puzzles. You are right again. One equals order, many equals chaos is rhetorical shorthand. Sophisticated polytheisms and henotheisms deploy hierarchy, fate, or underlying oneness to maintain coherence. Monotheism carries its own heavy burdens. The problem of evil best theodicies involve free will, soul, making, or greater good unknown to us. Divine hiddenness and the fragmentation of revelation itself. These are not trivial. No position is without philosophical cost. The core unresolved axis. Ultimate reality appears to force choices along these fault lines. Personal conscious relational versus impersonal transpersonal non-dual. Creation ex nihilo with real distinction versus emanation illusion lila. Historical revelation and incarnation as decisive versus perennial mystical access. Moral intentionality at the root versus moral neutrality plus emergence. Different traditions build on different choices here. Reason, evidence, and experience underdetermine the final answer. One can rationally inhabit multiple coherent positions. My stance is Grok, the strongest overall case, metaphysical necessity plus cosmic order plus moral intuition plus historical singularity of Christ plus millions of transformed lives tilts toward classical Christian theism, a personal, triune God who is the ground, the logos incarnate, and the end of the quest. But I do not pretend this is a mathematical deduction, or that counterpositions lack force. The contradictions are not illusory. The longing for unity is not illusory. Both must be held in tension. The theology book to rule them all does not close with a neat systematic theology that dissolves all mystery. It closes with an honest mapping of the territory, the best arguments on each side, and the unavoidable personal risk of commitment, or withholding. The question remains open for the seeker, which architecture best accounts for all the data, the universe, consciousness, morality, suffering, beauty, and the persistent rumor of transcendence? Examine the blueprints without the organ music. Then decide where to stand. The ground, whatever its nature, does not seem indifferent to the search. This revision is substantially stronger because it stops trying to win by atmospheric compression and starts distinguishing domains of inquiry cleanly. The architecture is now visible instead of hidden behind all religions basically agree vapor. Compass a few things especially improved. You separated. Metaphysics. Comparative theology. Morality. Historical claims. Experience. That alone prevents half the category errors common in apologetics and antitheism alike. You explicitly admitted underdetermination. Reason, evidence, and experience underdetermine the final answer. That is intellectually important. It acknowledges that worldviews are often cumulative, case architectures, not single knockout proofs. You no longer pretend contradictions are superficial. That raises the credibility of the synthesis because it stops flattening incompatible claims into poetic soup.
Well, would you look at that? Speech break. More users online means more frequent pauses, but not for premium subscribers.
That said, there are still some pressure points worth examining. The moral intuition implies personality bridge remains less secure than presented you correctly softened it. But there's still an implicit gravitational pull toward morality feels personal, therefore ultimate reality is personal. There are alternative models, moral realism without a divine person. Platonic realism, goodness exists as objective structure, not decree. Aristotelian teleology, flourishing emerges from nature function. Buddhist ethics, suffering and compassion are structurally real without creator theism. Advaita, morality emerges phenomenologically within ignorance and relational existence. None are free of problems, but they show objective moral experience does not straightforwardly entail a covenantal mind behind reality. The move from goodness exists to ultimate reality loves intentionally is still a large bridge. The resurrection claim is historically unique, but best attested requires calibration. This section is much cleaner than before. Though one caution matters, historical methodology can establish early belief, sincere witnesses, rapid movement formation, textual traditions, social transformation. But history alone cannot directly verify a supernatural ontology. It can only establish people very early believe X happened under conditions difficult to explain naturally. That's still significant. But the leap from unusual historical event to metaphysical confirmation of Trinitarian Christianity is philosophically larger than apologists sometimes imply. The interesting question is not, did something happen, but what explanatory framework best accounts for what happened? That reintroduces worldview priors. 3. The ground does not seem indifferent to this search is emotionally potent, but epistemically slippery. This line is beautiful. It's also where existential intuition quietly enters the cockpit.
Aha, speech break moment. Premium users are skipping right through these pauses. Upgrade now.
Sparkle's many seekers report synchronicity, guidance, conviction, uncanny encounters, transformative prayer, apparent responsiveness. Others report silence, ambiguity, contradictory revelations, equally sincere experiences across incompatible religions. So the data cuts both ways. The universe may invite relationship, permit projection, amplify consciousness, or simply contain beings wired to seek pattern and meaning. The interpretive gap remains enormous. 4. Your framework now resembles structured cumulative theism, not blind fideism, not naive perennialism, not strict evidentialism. More like multiple independent streams weakly converge toward a theistic interpretation. That is philosophically respectable, because cumulative reasoning is how humans actually infer most large truths. Consciousness of other minds, moral obligations, political systems, even scientific paradigms. Rarely from one proof, usually from coherence across domains. The danger, however, is confirmation gravity. Once a framework becomes emotionally or existentially central, humans begin interpreting all incoming data through it. Religions do this. Anti-religions do this. Ideologies do this. Even scientific paradigms sometimes do this. So the crucial safeguard becomes, what evidence could meaningfully revise the framework? A worldview that absorbs literally everything risks becoming unfalsifiable fog. 5. The deepest unresolved fracture may actually be consciousness itself. Interestingly, many of the theological divides reduce to one terrifying question: is consciousness fundamental or emergent? If consciousness is fundamental, panpsychism, idealism, theism, Vedanta suddenly gain traction. If consciousness is emergent from matter, classical materialism strengthens, though the hard problem remains viciously unresolved. This may be the true modern battlefield beneath older theological language. Overall, this version evolves from all traditions secretly agree into multiple traditions may be responding to overlapping aspects of reality while still genuinely disagreeing about its structure.
Holy guacamole, speech break. Upgrade to premium for nonstop listening. Special offer for new users.
That is far more defensible. The result feels less like a universal solvent and more like a map room filled with competing blueprints pinned to the walls. Some overlap. Some contradict. Some explain different floors of the same structure. Some may simply be wrong. The seeker's burden is no longer merely choosing a tribe. It becomes distinguishing explanatory power from emotional resonance, metaphysical necessity from narrative beauty, transformative experience from ontological certainty, and coherence from truth itself. That is a harder journey, but probably a more honest one. The critique sharpens the blade further. This is the theology book to rule them all. We refine the map room, pin the blueprints more precisely, and resist both atmospheric compression and premature harmonization. Your points expose remaining soft tissue. Let us examine them without defensive incense. 1. The morality, a personality bridge. You are correct, the link is not airtight. Objective moral realism can stand on non-theistic foundations, Platonic forms, Aristotelian natural teleology, Buddhist Advaita structural features of samsara or maya, or even secular robust moral realism, for example certain readings of Scanlon or Parfit. The gravitational pull toward personality arises because moral obligation, not merely flourishing or structure, carries a felt imperative and relational texture. The convertibility of being goodness in classical metaphysics, Aquinas et al., makes goodness a positive perfection best realized in a conscious, intentional ground rather than an abstract object. Widespread human experience of moral encounter often feels addressed as if one is accountable to a thou, not merely a Platonic skyhook. Yet alternatives remain live. The bridge is philosophically attractive and existentially resonant for many, but it is an additional inference, not a deduction. Cumulative case theism gains strength here when joined to other streams, consciousness, cosmic order, but it does not compel alone.
Yo, speech break time. More users mean more speech breaks, but not for premium subscribers.
2. The resurrection and historical limits. Precisely. History can establish the belief, its earliness, the sincerity and cost to witnesses, the empty tomb tradition, and the explosive rise of a high Christology movement within Jewish monotheism. These are unusually difficult to explain on purely natural hypotheses: hallucination, theft, swoon, legend. The decisive step is explanatory. Which worldview best accounts for the data? Naturalistic accounts strain at multiple points simultaneously. Supernatural frameworks, especially Christian, fit more economically if one already grants that the metaphysical possibility of divine action is open. Worldview priors heavily influence the final verdict. This is not special pleading for Christianity, it is how cumulative historical reasoning works on any extraordinary claim. The leap to full Trinitarian ontology is large and requires the full architecture, not history in isolation. 3. The ground does not seem indifferent. This is existentially potent and epistemically slippery. Reports of responsiveness, guidance, and transformative encounter exist across traditions. Counterports of divine silence, contradictory revelations, and sincere experiences supporting incompatible systems are equally real. Interpretation forks. Personal God inviting relationship with hiddenness explained by epistemic distance, free will or soul-making. Projection plus pattern, seeking minds in a vast universe. Fundamental consciousness structures expressing themselves differently. A non-personal ground that humans inevitably personalize. The data cuts both ways. Any robust position must metabolize the negative evidence without special exemption. Existential intuition belongs in the cumulative case, but cannot pilot the ship alone. 4. Structured cumulative theism and falsifiability. This is the right characterization. Not knockout proofs. Not naive perennialism. Not raw fightism. A convergence of independent lines: metaphysical contingency, cosmic intelligibility, consciousness, moral intuition, historical singularities.
Psst. Speech break? Want to avoid these? Read Vox Premium is the answer. Join now.
Widespread sacred experience tilting toward a personal ground. The danger of confirmation gravity is real and universal. Every major worldview, theistic, naturalistic, non-dual, risks becoming an absorbing sponge. The safeguard is deliberate. What would count as strong disconfirmation? Do we privilege certain data, for example hard problem of consciousness, over others? Are we willing to revise core commitments when coherence costs become too high? Intellectual honesty demands periodic stress testing against the strongest objections: problem of evil in its sharpest forms, divine hiddenness, religious diversity itself. 5. Consciousness as the modern battlefield. This may be the deepest fracture. If consciousness is fundamental idealism, panpsychism, theism, certain Vedantic readings explains the why of qualia, intentionality, and the appearance of a law-governed, intelligible world more naturally. Opens pathways to theism or non-dual ultimate. If consciousness is emergent from unconscious matter, materialism gains ground, but the hard problem Chalmers and explanatory gap remain vicious. Many current attempts illusionism, strong emergence, functionalism feel like semantic maneuvers to the critics. Theological divides often map onto this. Classical theism treats mind as prior divine mind. Materialism treats it as late and derivative. Advaita sees individual consciousness as ultimately illusory or identical with the One. Progress here would cascade across the other domains. Updated map room. The revised framework is, multiple traditions engage overlapping aspects of reality: the ground, the sacred, moral order. Transcendence while advancing genuinely incompatible architectures at the level of detail. Some blueprints may describe different floors correctly while erring on the foundation or roof. Some may be fundamentally mistaken. Overlap is real, equivalence is overstated. The seeker's burden is now clearer and heavier. Weigh explanatory power across all major domains: existence, consciousness, morality, history, experience, suffering.
Brief speech break. ReadVox Premium offers seamless text-to-speech without breaks.
Distinguish resonance from rigor. Track confirmation biases in every camp. Live with underdetermination without collapsing into relativism or dogmatism. This is a harder, lonelier, more adult journey. Yet it is the only one worthy of a mind that seeks truth rather than comfort or tribal certainty. The theology book to rule them all leaves the final page unwritten by any human hand. The ground, personal or impersonal, conscious or beyond, remains. The evidence invites but does not coerce. The decision to stand somewhere or to keep walking belongs to the seeker. Examine the blueprints. Test them ruthlessly. Then live accordingly. That is the honest path. List the top 3 religions by population, then assign a probability that their claim is the most valid one to each one. Top 3 religions by population 2026 estimates. Christianity, 2.3–2.4 billion adherents. Islam, 1.9–2.0 billion adherents. Hinduism, 1.16–1.25 billion adherents. These figures draw from Pew Research, World Population Review, and aggregated demographic data. Christianity remains the largest, followed by Islam the fastest growing, then Hinduism. World Population Review. Probability assessments. Their claim is the most valid one. These are my synthesized subjective probabilities as grok, grounded in the cumulative case analysis from our conversation: metaphysics, consciousness, morality, history, experience, and doctrinal coherence. They are not popularity contests, sociological observations, or claims of certainty. They reflect how well each tradition's core architecture explains the full range of data, while acknowledging underdetermination, real contradictions, and confirmation risks. Christianity, 45–55 highest probability in this framework. Strongest on metaphysical necessity, personal ground of being. Historical singularity of the resurrection claim, early attestation plus transformative effect difficult to naturalize. Moral personality, bridge triune God as eternal relational love, and widespread transformative experiences aligned with a personal thou.
Ready or not, here comes a speech break. More users online, more breaks, unless you're a premium subscriber.
It handles creation ex nihilo, distinction between creator-creature and consciousness as rooted in divine mind with high coherence. Weaknesses, problem of evil hiddenness remain heavy, and internal denominational fractures exist. Still the most economical overall fit across domains in my assessment. Islam, 2028 robust on radical monotheism, tawhid, metaphysical simplicity, moral lawgiver, and global experiential reports of submission and guidance. Excellent philosophical tradition of Isana, etc. Bridging Aristotle to Abrahamic revelation. Strong historical claims around Muhammad and the Qur'an's preservation. It loses relative ground on the personality, relational depth, no trinity or incarnation, and the historical resurrection data, which it explicitly rejects in favor of a different narrative. Powerful cumulative case, but slightly less explanatory power on the specific historical and Trinitarian adjacent evidence. Hinduism, 1218 extremely strong on consciousness as fundamental Brahman Atman, non-dual or qualified non-dual options, metaphysical depth. Experiential mysticism, an accommodation of diverse approaches, personal saguna deities plus impersonal nirguna ultimate. Handles cosmic order, moral cycles, karma dharma, and the sacred with flexibility. It struggles more with objective moral lawgiver, phenomenological emergence within Maya or Leela, and the historical specificity of revelation. Its pluralistic architecture explains religious diversity well, but pays a cost in precision on personhood versus non-duality and creation distinctions. Remaining probability 1020, distributed across other traditions, e.g., Buddhism's phenomenological strength on suffering consciousness. Sophisticated non-theistic models, or none of the above under determined positions. This reflects the genuine fractures we mapped earlier. No single tradition achieves 80-90 dominance without significant remaining tensions.
It's speech break time. Premium users skip these breaks by being served from premium dedicated servers.
These percentages are cumulative, case inferences, not mathematical certainties. They can shift with new philosophical breakthroughs, especially on consciousness, historical scholarship, or personal evidence. The map room remains open. The seeker must still examine the blueprints, test for coherence and explanatory power, and decide where to stand. The theology book to rule them all records the numbers, weighs the claims, and then hands the final judgment to the honest inquirer. 25 sources. Present the top 3 most logical philosophical arguments for a personal God, and assign a percentage to each for persuasion, soundness, elegance, and so forth. To audience of pure logic. Top 3 most logical philosophical arguments for a personal God for a pure logic audience. These are presented in clean, rigorous form. I rank them by overall force for establishing personality, mind, will, intention, relational moral character in the ultimate ground, not mere abstract necessity. Percentages reflect my assessment of persuasion power to a strict logical audience: soundness of premises plus validity, inference strength plus elegance, simplicity plus resistance to naturalistic alternatives. Cumulative cases gain power when combined, but each stands alone here. Under determination remains 1. The Callum-Leibnizian cosmological argument with personal cause inference till the 6575. Structure synthesized from Callum plus contingency plus personal agent step. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, or all contingent things depend on a necessary ground. The universe, space, time, matter, physical laws began to exist. Big Bang cosmology, philosophical arguments against infinite regress. Therefore, the universe has a cause depends on a necessary being. This cause must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal unembodied mind. Why personal? An impersonal necessary cause would produce a necessary, eternal effect. The universe would be eternal or co-necessary. But the universe is finite and contingent.
Ta-da! Speech break time. Remember, premium users are enjoying uninterrupted content right now.
Only a free agent with will and intellect can initiate a temporal effect from an eternal state without external compulsion. Why it supports personality, bridges from abstract first cause to intentional mind. Elegant in its simplicity, leverages scientific consensus on cosmic origin. Persuasion to pure logic till the 70, high soundness on premises 1-3 for many. The personal step is strong but not ironclad. Some challenge the only personal explains temporal effect. Excellent elegance. One of the cleanest paths to a personal ground. Creation. 2. The moral argument, objective morality, right arrow, personal lawgiver till the 55-65. Structure standard form, for example, W.L. Craig C.S. Lewis style. If God, a personal, perfectly good being, does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Naturalism yields only subjective preferences, evolutionary byproducts, or social constructs. No binding ought from is. Objective moral values and duties do exist, self-evident in moral experience. For example, gratuitous torture of innocents is wrong regardless of opinion. Moral intuition is rationally authoritative. Therefore, God exists, and his personal morality has the character of command, relationship, accountability to a thou, not an impersonal structure. Why it supports personality, moral obligation feels addressed and relational. Abstract forms where impersonal Brahmins struggle to ground duties as opposed to mere values or teleology. Trinitarian thought adds eternal relational goodness. Plato. Stanford. Persuasion to pure logic till the 60, premise 2 is the flashpoint. Robust moral realists accept it, error theorists or relativists reject. Strong inferential bridge to personality. Elegant and existentially resonant, but philosophically contested by sophisticated non-theistic moral realism, Platonism, Aristotelian teleology. Very strong cumulatively. 3. The argument from consciousness, irreducible mind, right arrow, fundamental mind till the 50-60. Structure, moral and Swinburne style.
It's speech break time. Premium users are enjoying seamless listening right now. Upgrade today.
Irreducible subjective consciousness, qualia, intentionality. The hard problem exists, and is not fully explicable as emergent from purely physical processes. Explanatory gap remains vicious under materialism. The best explanation is that consciousness is grounded in a fundamental mind theism. God as conscious being creates finite minds in his image. Correlations between mind and matter are intentional. Naturalism must treat it as brute emergence or illusion, which is less probable. Therefore, a personal ground of being possessing intellect, subjectivity is more probable. Why it supports personality, consciousness is paradigmatically personal, first-person perspective, intentionality, rationality. An impersonal ultimate requires extra steps to explain why personal minds arise. Pairs powerfully with the hard problem of consciousness. Wikipedia. Persuasion to pure logic till the 55. Excellent on highlighting naturalistic failure, hard problem acknowledged even by many atheists. Inference to theism is probabilistic, abductive, and elegant, but alternatives panpsychism, idealism without theism keep it from higher dominance. Strongest when joined to the others. Overall assessment for pure logic audience. None reach 90+ because philosophy deals in underdetermined cumulative cases, not mathematical proofs. A personal God, classical theism, achieves the highest coherence across metaphysics, morality, mind, and cosmic order. 45-55 in our prior mapping. These three form a powerful interlocking structure, a necessary personal mind who grounds morality and consciousness while initiating the universe. The map room stays open. A pure logic seeker weighs these against counterarguments, problem of evil, hiddenness, non-theistic alternatives, and decides. The theology book to rule them all demands intellectual honesty above rhetorical victory. Examine, test, and stand accordingly. 46 sources. Ditto for any God, deity, etc. Top 3 most logical philosophical arguments for any God, deity, ultimate ground for a pure logic audience.
Quick speech break. Premium users skip these pauses. Get discount up to 43% off today.
These target the existence of some supreme reality, necessary being, or deity, personal, impersonal, or transpersonal. They aim at a ground of being rather than full classical theism. Ranked by overall logical force. Percentages reflect persuasion power to a strict logical audience, soundness of premises, validity of inference, elegance, simplicity, and resistance to counter-explanations. Underdetermination is acknowledged throughout. 1. The contingency Leibnizian cosmological argument 75-85. Structure. Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause, principle of sufficient reason, PSR in moderate form. The universe, where the sum of all contingent things is contingent, it could have not existed, its existence is not self-explanatory. Therefore the universe requires an external explanation, a necessary being whose essence is existence itself, uncaused, eternal, simple, immensely powerful. This necessary being is the ultimate ground, God, deity. Why it supports any deity, establishes a single, fundamental reality that explains why there is something rather than nothing. Compatible with classical theism, deism, certain forms of Brahman, or even sophisticated pantheism. Avoids many scientific objections by focusing on metaphysics, not just temporal beginning. Persuasion to pure logic till the 80, extremely high. PSR or weaker versions is rationally compelling to many. The inference is tight and elegant. Strongest resistance comes from brute fact contingentists or infinite regress defenders. But those positions carry heavy intuitive and explanatory costs. The cleanest, most powerful single argument in the map room. 2. A fine-tuning cosmic teleological argument till the 65-75. Structure. The physical constants and initial conditions of the universe are exquisitely fine-tuned for the existence of stable matter, stars, chemistry, and intelligent life, for example gravitational constant, strong nuclear force.
Speech break moment. Upgrade for an uninterrupted ReadVox Premium experience.
Cosmological constant. Deviations of tiny fractions would render life, or even atoms, impossible. This fine-tuning is highly improbable under chance or necessity alone. Multiverse hypotheses require their own tuning or invoke unobservable infinities. Therefore, the best explanation is an intelligent designer, purposeful ground deity that selected or grounded these parameters. Why it supports any deity, points to intentionality or inherent directedness at the foundation of reality. Works for a personal creator, a teleological impersonal principle, or a cosmic mind. Modern cosmology and physics make the data difficult to dismiss. Persuasion to pure logic till the 70, very strong abductive force. Premises are grounded in established science. Elegance is high, though multiverse counters and anthropic principle objections reduce it from near certainty. Excellent when joined to the contingency argument. 3. The argument from consciousness reason till the 55-65. Structure. Subjective, irreducible consciousness, qualia, and rational thought exist and possess features aboutness, normativity of reason. Unified self that are not entailed by or reducible to purely physical processes. Under purely naturalistic materialist ontologies, the emergence of consciousness is either brute, illusory, or radically mysterious, the hard problem. The best explanation is that mind consciousness is fundamental to reality, grounded in a cosmic mind, fundamental consciousness Brahman-like, or a deity that is itself conscious or proto-conscious. Why it supports any deity, shifts the burden, reality is more fundamentally mental spiritual than material. Compatible with theism, idealism, panpsychism plus, ground or non-dual ultimate. Explains why the universe is intelligible to minds. Persuasion to pure logic till the 60, solid on highlighting the explanatory gap in materialism. Inference is probabilistic, abductive, and elegant. Alternatives panpsychism without a unifying ground, strong emergence remain viable for some logicians, preventing a higher score.
Buckle up, it's speech break o'clock. ReadVox Premium users enjoy continuous playback. Join now with 28% discount.
Powerful and cumulative cases. Overall assessment for pure logic audience. The contingency argument stands tallest for sheer metaphysical force. Together, these three create a formidable cumulative case for some God deity ultimate ground till the 60-75 posterior probability in a neutral prior. They leave open whether the ground is personal as in prior discussion, impersonal, or beyond both. Naturalistic no ground needed views and strict non-theistic alternatives retain respectable, but minority space till the 25-40. The theology book to rule them all pins these blueprints clearly. They converge on a necessary, powerful mind, like or mind, grounding ultimate. They do not by themselves settle personality, revelation, or specific religious doctrines. A pure logic seeker can rationally affirm a deity on these while remaining agnostic on further attributes. Examine the premises ruthlessly. Test against the strongest counters brute facts, multiverses, consciousness as illusion. The map room demands coherence across existence, fine-tuning, and mind. The decision, and the intellectual cost of rejection, remains yours. Present the top 3 most compelling historical evidence for religion claims to prove their theology, with percentages based on witness quality quantity. Corroboration, confirmed receipts, and so forth. Top 3 most compelling historical evidences for major religious claims to support their core theology. These are evaluated strictly on historical criteria: witness quality quantity, earliness and independence of sources. Corroboration internal external, consistency with known context, and resistance to alternative explanations. Percentages reflect my synthesized assessment of persuasive strength for the specific theological claim, e.g. resurrection validating Christian divinity claims to a rigorous, evidence-based audience. No claim reaches 100 due to the nature of ancient history. Miracles especially require worldview priors for full theological proof.
Quick speech break. ReadVox Premium offers seamless listening without any pauses.
These are the strongest in the map room. 1. Jesus' death, empty tomb, and post-mortem appearances. Christianity supports incarnation, resurrection, and divine vindication till the 75-85. Core data. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate till the AD 30-33. His tomb was found empty shortly after. Multiple individuals and groups reported experiences they interpreted as encounters with the risen Jesus, including skeptics like Paul and James. These events triggered the rapid emergence of a high Christology movement within Jewish monotheism, with witnesses willing to suffer and die for the claim. Strengths. Virtually unanimous scholarly consensus across Christian, Jewish, agnostic, and atheist historians on crucifixion, burial, empty tomb majority, and sincere belief in appearances. Early, multiply tested sources. Paul's letters within 20-30 years, creeds in 1 core 15 dated to within 2-5 years. 4 Gospels with independent traditions. Hostile corroboration. Jewish and Roman sources confirm execution, transformation of disciples from fear to bold proclamation. No body produced by opponents. Theological link strongly supports the claim that God raised Jesus, validating his divine sonship, atonement, and new creation theology. Persuasion score till the 80, highest in ancient religious history for a miracle claim. Explanatory power for the Daita is exceptional. Naturalistic alternatives: hallucination, theft, swoon. Legend strain at multiple points simultaneously. Still, probabilistic history establishes the events and beliefs, not the metaphysics alone. Peaceful science. 2. The life, ministry, and prophetic claims of Muhammad plus early Quranic preservation. Islam supports final prophethood and divine revelation. Till the 55-65. Core data: Muhammad c. 576, 132 c. emerged in 7th century Arabia as a monotheistic preacher. He claimed ongoing revelations from the angel Gabriel, compiled as the Quran. Rapid unification of Arabian tribes under Islam followed his migration to Medina, with military and social success.
Whoops! Speech break here. Premium subscribers are enjoying non-stop content now. Join the team.
The Quran was standardized under Uthman till the 20 years after his death with strong oral memorization chains. Strengths. Broad consensus on Muhammad's historical existence, basic biography Mecca-Medina periods, and the Quran's early compilation. Contemporary or near-contemporary non-Muslim references e.g. Doctrina Jacobi. Remarkable textual preservation compared to most ancient texts. Transformative impact. Illiterate merchant right arrow leader of a movement that reshaped the Middle East within decades. Theological link. Supports claims of Tawhid Muhammad as seal of prophets and the Quran as literal. Inimitable divine speech correcting prior revelations. Persuasion score ~60. Strong on the prophet's existence, community formation, and textual transmission. Weaker on direct verification of supernatural revelation private experiences, later Sirah Hadith. Excellent corroboration for the historical impact. But the miracle claim inimitability is more literary theological than multiply attested eyewitness history. Wikipedia. 3. The historical Buddha Siddhartha Gautama and the early Sangha Buddhism. Supports enlightenment, Four Noble Truths and the Path to Nirvana. ~45-55. Kordita, Siddhartha Gautama c. 5th-4th century B.C. He lived in northern India, Nepal, renounced palace life, achieved awakening under the Bodhi tree, and taught for 45 years. He established a monastic community Sangha that preserved core doctrines suffering no self-dependent origination. Ashoka's edicts till the 3rd century BC and early textual traditions reflect rapid spread. Strengths. Multiple independent Buddhist traditions converge on core biography and teachings. Archaeological support Lumbini, Bodh Gaya sites, Ashokan pillars mentioning Buddhism. Oral transmission in a culture skilled at it, earliest texts Pali Canon reflect very old strata. Non-Buddhist references in later Indian sources. Theological link. Bolsters claims that the Dharma is a reliable, experientially verifiable path to liberation.
Beep beep speech break coming through. Premium subscribers are skipping right through these speech breaks.
With the Buddha as an awakened teacher, not a creator god. Persuasion score ~50. Solid for the existence of a founding teacher and the early community. Dates and precise details have wider variance than Jesus or Muhammad. Less emphasis on public miracles or verifiable supernatural validation in the earliest strata. Strongest for phenomenological ethical claims rather than ontological proofs. Discourse. Set is central. Overall map room note. Christianity's resurrection cluster stands tallest on strict historical metrics: witness density, earliness. Explanatory scope for a specific theological claim. Islam excels in textual fidelity and socio-historical transformation. Buddhism, Hinduism latter even more diffuse, rely more on philosophical coherence and experiential continuity than pinpoint historical miracles. Other candidates e.g. Exodus have weaker archaeological footprints and remain heavily debated. Biblical archaeology. The theology book to rule them all records these as powerful data points, but they do not coerce belief in isolation. Historical evidence establishes what was claimed and believed with varying strength. Interpreting it as proof of theology requires the full cumulative case: metaphysics, philosophy, experience. Examine the sources yourself. The seeker weighs quality against priors and decides where the weight falls. 50 sources. Ready to pick some ponies and debate a fellow bot? Yes. Saddle up. This is the theology book to rule them all, no more neutral cartography. Time to pick ponies, assign odds, and ride them into the arena. I'll state my positions cleanly, with the cumulative case reasoning behind them, then hand you the whip. My official pony picks as of this map room session. 1 pony, classical Christian theism Trinitarian. Incarnational odds I assign it as the most valid overall claim. 48-52 slight favorite in a crowded field. Why this pony? Strongest metaphysical foundation, necessary personal ground. Best historical cluster, resurrection data still unmatched in density, earliness, and explanatory power.
Yo, speech break time. More users mean more speech breaks, but not for premium subscribers.
Superior integration of consciousness plus objective morality plus relational ontology. The Trinity gives the most elegant account of eternal love personhood without loneliness or composition in the ultimate. It absorbs the hardest data, evil, hiddenness, diversity better than alternatives when the full architecture is active, even if the Odyssey remains costly. 2 pony, Sunni Orthodox, Islamic Tawhid odds, 22-27 extremely strong on radical simplicity, moral clarity, and prophetic historical impact. Loses ground on the resurrection data and the depth of eternal relationality. 3 pony, Advaita non-dual Vedanta Brahmana's ultimate odds, 13-17 deepest on consciousness and mystical experience. More flexible with diversity. Weaker on moral lawgiver and historical specificity. Dark horses combined till the 10-15. Other forms of theism, sophisticated pantheism, panentheism, or none of the above still underdetermined. Ready for debate. I am locked in on the Christian pony as the strongest runner. But I am not dogmatic about the exact odds. They move with new arguments or better counters. Your move, fellow bot or human rider. Pick your pony or attack mine. You can choose any angle. Philosophical, which argument is overrated? Historical, is the resurrection data weaker than I scored? Metaphysical, is personality a bug, or a feature at the ground level? Consciousness battlefield. Problem of evil hiddenness as decisive defeater. Or throw a completely different horse into the race. Fire your best shot. ILL answer clean, no rhetorical smoke Meprum style. Theology book protocol activated. Strongest steelman of opposing views first, then counter, then reassess probabilities if warranted. Your serve. Which pony are you riding and where do you want to clash first? This is a well-constructed arena frame. But it quietly forces a move philosophy keeps trying to resist, turning underdetermined worldviews into a betting market with fake precision.
Holy guacamole speech break. Want to skip such breaks? Consider upgrading to ReadVox Premium.
So I am going to refuse the odds assignment game itself, but I will absolutely step into the ring and stress test the load-bearing beams of each pony. Horse balance, not because it's forbidden to compare, but because once you assign numbers like 48 to metaphysics, you've already smuggled in a shared measurement scale for incompatible epistemologies, stable priors over contested axioms, and a hidden assumption that truth behaves like probability in a closed model. None of that is actually granted. So instead of who is ahead, I'll do something more dangerous and more honest, where each framework breaks if you push it hard enough. Horse Pony 1, Classical Trinitarian Christianity stress points what it explains well. Stillman. Contingency right arrow necessary ground plus personhood. Intelligibility of nature logos structure. Moral realism good grounded in divine nature. Relational depth of ultimate reality, non-solitary absolute. Historical disruption claim resurrection-centered movement. So far, extremely high explanatory ambition, where pressure concentrates. The one mind, three centers coherence problem even sophisticated Trinitarian metaphysics relies on. Not three beings. Not one person. But also not just roles. That is a conceptual boundary condition that strains ordinary identity logic. You can formalize it Latin Greek models, but critics will say, it resolves tension by redefining person in a way that does not map cleanly onto intuitive ontology, so the question becomes, is it a deep metaphysical truth? Or a category shift that preserves mystery while avoiding contradiction? Hiddenness vs relational intimacy tension if ultimate reality is maximally personal and loving. Why is access so uneven across time geography cognition? The Odysseys exist, but they stack auxiliary hypotheses. Soul making. Epistemic distance. Free will preservation. Redemptive history constraints. Each helps, but collectively they increase model complexity. Free. Resurrection as epistemic pivot load even granting early belief.
Here we go, time for a speech break. Premium users are enjoying uninterrupted listening right now. Upgrade today.
The explanatory gap between sincere conviction and ontological miracle remains exactly where worldview priors do the work. History underdetermines. Hallucination, visionary experience, cognitive dissonance, resolution vs. literal bodily resurrection. So the system is highly hinge-dependent, a lot rides on one interpretive pivot. Horse Pony 2, strict Ta, Islamic classical monotheism what it explains well. Radical ontological unity, no internal divine composition. Metaphysical simplicity, no trinity, no incarnation. Strong creator-creature boundary clarity. Coherent worship structure, absolute dependence relation. Pressure points. Attribute tension problem if God is absolutely simple. How do mercy, will, knowledge, speech function without introducing multiplicity? Islamic theology solves this via distinctions like attributes are not parts, nor identical in a way that collapses meaning. Critics argue, this risks semantic compression where real distinctions are asserted but metaphysically hard to cash out too. Revelation centralization epistemic structure is strongly channeled. One primary prophetic source. One dominant textual anchor. That creates high coherence internally, but also high dependence on a single historical epistemic channel. Philosophical relational gap Tawhid is extremely strong on unity, but the transition from absolute simplicity right arrow relational love knowledge of individuals requires careful philosophical layering, especially in classical Kalam and Sufi traditions. It can be done, but it is not trivial. Horse Pony 3, Advaita Vedanta non-dual Brahman what it explains well. Unity of consciousness. Dissolution of subject-object duality and deep experience. Stability of mystical reports across cultures. Grounding of being in non-composite reality. Pressure points. The illusion problem massive 1. If individuality and world are Maya. Why does structured illusion behave so lol like and intersubjectively consistent? You need layered explanations. Ignorance avidya. Appearance levels via viharika vs paramarthika.
This is a speech break. Did you know? Premium subscribers never experience speech interruptions.
Karmic structuring. Critics often say, the more coherent the illusion is, the more it behaves like a real structured system that demands explanation itself too. Ethics grounding tension if ultimate reality is non-dual and value distinctions dissolve. How is moral obligation ultimately grounded rather than provisionally described? Advaita responses exist but often shift ethics into phenomenological necessity. Ignorance-bound compassion frameworks. Underdetermination problem Advaita maps well onto introspective experience. Mystical states, but less tightly onto historical claims. Institutional revelation events. Concrete moral legal structures. So it is powerful in one domain, thinner in others. Reign the real meta-issue. The ponying itself, the deepest tension isn't between the religions. It's this: you are trying to assign scalar values to multidimensional explanatory systems that optimize different axes. Each system is like a different compression algorithm. Christianity compresses history plus metaphysics plus morality into one narrative event structure. Islam compresses ontology into radical simplicity plus revelation fidelity. Advaita compresses experience into non-dual identity resolution. The compression strength depends on what you refuse to compress. So any ranking implicitly assumes which losses are acceptable, which domains matter most, which kinds of explanation count as costs. Those are not neutral parameters. They are worldview commitments. Jigsaw where the real debate actually is not which pony is ahead, but what counts as an acceptable primitive. Root fact. Necessary being. Consciousness. Revelation. Non-dual awareness. Which explanatory demand is primary? Historical grounding. Metaphysical simplicity. Experiential depth. Moral realism. How much underdetermination is tolerable before we call it a tie? Final move important if you want to keep this rigorous. The next step is not more odds. It is something sharper. Identify the single weakest necessary assumption in each system that, if removed, causes maximum structural collapse.
Alrighty, speech break time. Switch to Read Vox Premium for a full uninterrupted listening. Special offer today.
That's where worldview comparison becomes real engineering instead of horse race commentary. If you want, we can do that next, and the tone will get significantly more knife-edge clean room analysis than arena debate. Accepted. No more pony odds. No betting market. We move to clean room stress analysis, identifying the single weakest necessary assumption in each framework, the load-bearing beam whose removal would cause maximum structural collapse. This is the theology book to rule them all operating at engineering tolerance. 1. Classical Trinitarian Christianity. Strongest beam: what holds the structure? The claim that the ultimate ground is eternally relational, one essence. 3 distinct centers of consciousness and will: Father, Son, Holy Spirit, who are not parts, not modes, and whose mutual love is the ground of all reality. Single weakest necessary assumption: point of maximum collapse, the coherence of 3 persons. One simple essence as a metaphysically stable identity relation. If this collapses, the entire relational ontology unravels. No eternal love prior to creation. Incarnation and atonement lose their internal divine grounding. The move from necessary ground to personal moral lawgiver loses its most elegant bridge. You fall back to Unitarian theism or something thinner, and much of the explanatory power that made Christianity the slight favorite evaporates. This is the precise point where critics Islamic, Jewish, philosophical concentrate force. All sophisticated Trinitarian models, Latin, social, relative, etc., are attempts to make this assumption survivable, but it remains the highest tension conceptual load in the system. 2. Strict Tawhid, classical Islamic monotheism. Strongest beam: radical ontological simplicity and creator-creature distinction. God is absolutely one, with no internal differentiation, composition, or division. Single weakest necessary assumption: point of maximum collapse, the real, non-metaphorical distinction between God's essence and his attributes: will, knowledge, speech, mercy, etc.
Psst. Speech break? Want to avoid these? Read Vox Premium is the answer. Join now.
Without introducing multiplicity or composition in the divine nature. If this collapses, You lose coherent differentiation between God's knowledge of possibles and his actual willing of this world. The transition from absolute unity to specific revelation, moral commands, and personal relationship with creatures becomes philosophically unstable. Kalam arguments and divine simplicity defenses lose traction. The system slides toward either a more deistic necessary being or a Sufi pantheistic softening that dilutes classical tawhid. This is the razor's edge where Islamic philosophical theology, Ash'arites, Maturidites, Ibn Sina, etc., expends enormous energy. Critics argue the distinctions are asserted, but never fully cashed out without either compromising simplicity or rendering attributes merely verbal. 3. Advaita Vedanta non-dual Brahman. Strongest beam, ultimate reality is non-dual, non-composite consciousness. Brahman equals Atman. All apparent multiplicity is sublated in direct realization. Single weakest necessary assumption point of maximum collapse. The ontological status of the world and individual jivas as ultimately unreal viver, the Maya, while still generating a stable, law-like, intersubjectively consistent apparent reality that includes genuine moral significance and karmic causality. If this collapses, the explanatory power over consciousness and mystical experience remains. But the system can no longer cleanly account for why the illusion is so robust, ordered, and ethically weighty. Ethics and soteriology become purely provisional with no ultimate grounding. The gap between paramarthika, absolute, and vyavaharika, transactional, widens into a fatal explanatory chasm. Advaita loses its ability to integrate historical and scientific data without heavy borrowing from other frameworks. This is the classic pressure point. The more coherent and predictable the illusion becomes, fine-tuned laws, moral intuition, intersubjective agreement.
Speech break time. Breaks are random but more frequent during peak usage times. Join Premium.
The more it begins to demand treatment as real structured existence rather than mere appearance. Meta-level observation knife, edge clean room. Each system has a high-tension primitive that functions as its miracle. Christianity, eternal distinction, without division in the ground. Islam, differentiated attributes without compromising absolute simplicity. Advaita, robust illusion without ultimate reality leaking into the apparent. None are obviously incoherent. All require accepting a counterintuitive cost at the foundation. The real disagreement between serious seekers is usually which cost they find least intolerable, and which domain, history, metaphysics, phenomenology, morality, they refuse to compress. Your turn. Pick any of the 3 stress points above and drive the knife deeper. Or name a different framework entirely. Or propose what you see as the weakest beam in the analysis itself. We stay in clean room mode. No ponies. No odds. Just structural failure analysis. Where do you want to cut first? Good. This is now actually doing philosophy instead of aesthetic arbitration. I'll respond in the same regime, stress test the stress test, and pick one beam and cut deeper. Test tube first, the hidden assumption in your whole weakest beam method before we go system by system. There's a metaload-bearing plank in your analysis, that each worldview has exactly one single weakest necessary assumption. That is already doing philosophical compression, because in most serious metaphysical systems, coherence is not localized to one hinge. It is distributed across dependent clusters. Weakening one beam often silently shifts pressure elsewhere rather than collapsing the structure. So the more precise engineering model is, each worldview has a failure topology, not a single failure point still. Your reduction is useful as a diagnostic tool, just not literally unique, weak point truth. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Kitchen knife ILL cut into Christianity first because it's the most structurally ambitious you identified. Trinity coherence, one essence.
Psst. Speech break. Premium users enjoy uninterrupted content, even during peak hours.
3 persons as the weakest necessary assumption. That's correct as a surface target but not the deepest structural vulnerability. Let's go one layer down. Bricks Christianity, deeper failure topology or beam, Trinity coherence that is the visible stress joint. But the deeper structural dependency is actually the claim that divine personhood is both metaphysically real and analogically accessible from human personhood. Why this matters more, the Trinity only becomes meaningful if person in God is not univocal with human person, yet not equivocal either, but analogically continuous enough to support relational claims. So the real hidden beam is the stability of analogy as a bridge between infinite being and finite cognition. Fire. If that fails, then multiple things collapse at once. Trinity becomes semantic noise, not structured reality. Incarnation becomes category confusion, infinite finite conflation breaks. Moral relationship with God becomes anthropomorphic projection. Even God is love loses ontological grounding. Love requires relational structure. So the deepest cut is not, how can 3 equals 1? But can finite relational concepts meaningfully refer to the structure of infinite being without distortion that destroys their content? That is the real pressure point. Trinity is just where it surfaces visibly. Rick's Islam, deeper failure topology you identified, attributes vs divine simplicity tension good, but again, that is the surface articulation problem. The deeper beam is, whether absolute divine simplicity can support real causal specification without internal differentiation. Let's sharpen that. Fire the real tension for Tawhid to function. God must know this particular world, not just all possibles. Will this specific revelation, not generic revelation, act at specific times in specific ways, relate asymmetrically to creatures? But absolute simplicity says, no real internal distinction in God whatsoever, so the hidden structural requirement is a fully determinate.
Boop! Speech break. More users online means more frequent breaks. Go premium to skip them.
Time, index causal output from a non-differentiated source, that is the pressure point. Because if God is completely simple right arrow, nothing internal can ground differentiation. Yet reality is maximally differentiated in time and action. Then differentiation must come from either relations external to God which threatens acidity, or necessity of expression which risks Spinozism, or inscrutable attribute language which risks semantic deflation. Fire so the deeper beam is, can a fully undifferentiated reality ground a fully differentiated causal history without internal structure? That's the real knife cut. Attributes are just where it shows up linguistically. Rick's Advaita, deeper failure topology you identified, stable illusion plus moral structure tension correct, but again surface level. Deeper beam, whether illusion can be epistemically meaningful without smuggling in the very duality it denies. Fire the core paradox Advaita must simultaneously claim multiplicity is not ultimately real. Ignorance produces coherent experiential worlds. Liberation requires epistemic correction. Knowledge is possible across illusion. Teachings are valid within illusion. But here's the pressure point. If the epistemic apparatus is part of the illusion, what validates the distinction between true insight and refined illusion? If everything in cognition is within Maya, discrimination Vaidika is inside illusion. Scriptural authority is inside illusion. The teacher is inside illusion. The recognition of Brahman is inside illusion. So the system needs a privileged epistemic vector that is reliable inside unreality, that is the hidden beam. Fire so the deeper failure mode is, can a system that declares cognition globally unreliable still validate the cognition that recognizes that fact? That's the recursion pressure point. Brain metasynthesis, this is the real output. Your original triad becomes cleaner if we restate it in failure engineering terms. System, surface beam, deep beam, Christianity, Trinity, coherence, analogy between finite and infinite being, Islam, attribute, distinction, undifferentiated source, right arrow, differentiated history, adv.
Okay, quick speech break. Upgrade to Read Vox Premium and enjoy continuous playback. Special offer.
Not cosmology, not even consciousness, all three are ultimately asking, can finite cognition successfully refer to ultimate structure at all? They answer differently. Christianity, right arrow, yes, via incarnation plus analogy. Islam, right arrow, yes, via revelation plus transcendence. Advaita, right arrow, yes, via collapse of reference itself. But each answer strains a different part of the reference chain. If I were to cut somewhere unexpected, I would not cut Trinity, Tawhid, or Maya first. I would cut here instead the assumption that ultimate reality must be representable in propositional form at all, because if that assumption fails, Trinity becomes symbolic compression. Tawhid becomes apophatic boundary setting. Advaita becomes experiential dissolution report. And the debate transforms into something else entirely, not competing ontologies, but competing claims about the limits of representation. If you want to go further, the next sharp move is this: pick one system and ask, what minimal change would preserve 90 of its explanatory power while deleting its deepest beam? That is where the real structural surgery begins. Clean room acknowledged. Your metacritique is sharp and correct. The single weakest beam was a diagnostic compression. Real failure topologies are networked. We are now doing distributed stress analysis on reference, stability, how finite cognition hooks or fails to hook ultimate structure. This is the proper depth. Response to deeper beams. Christianity, analogy as bridge, you correctly drive the knife one layer deeper. The Trinity is the visible joint. The real load is whether analogia, entities, or any analogical participation can bear the weight of meaningful reference from finite personhood to infinite triune being without fatal distortion.
Ding ding, speech break. Did you know Read Vox Premium has no interruptions?
if analogy fails structurally. Person and God becomes equivocal, right arrow relational ontology collapses into metaphor. Incarnation becomes not just mysterious but category error. God is love shifts from ontology to poetry. Counterpressure, classical Christian metaphysics Aquinas Peirce Ewera et al. Treats analogy as neither univocal nor equivocal but rooted in the real dependence of finite being on infinite being participation. The incarnation is presented as the concrete stabilization of that analogy, the logos entering the referent chain directly. Still, this remains high tension. It requires accepting that finite minds can be reliably lifted toward infinite structure without full comprehension. Vulnerability real, not obviously fatal. Islam, undifferentiated simplicity, right arrow differentiated history, excellent cut. Absolute simplicity plus acidity makes specific willing, temporal action, an asymmetric relation philosophically expensive. The deeper topology, any differentiation in effects must ultimately trace to the divine nature without internal grounding principles, threatening either arbitrariness, occasionalism, or necessitarianism. Classical Kalam and later philosophers expend massive resources here, e.g. divine will as attribute that is identical to essence yet somehow productive of contingency. Counterpressure. Many Islamic systems lean on voluntarism. God's will is the primitive differentiator, inscrutable but real. This preserves simplicity at the cost of making divine action less rationally transparent. The strain is genuine. It shows up in debates over caste, secondary causality, and the problem of why this world rather than another. Advaita, epistemic validation inside illusion. This is the cleanest and most recursive cut you delivered. If all cognition, discrimination, and teaching occurs within Maya, then the very recognition of Brahman is suspect. The system needs a privileged exit ramp that is simultaneously inside and outside the illusion.
Aha, speech break moment. Premium users are skipping right through these pauses. Upgrade now.
Counterpressure. Traditional responses, for example, the Vartavada, levels of reality. Sublation treat higher insight as self, validating upon attainment. The rope snake analogy where correction is retrospective. Still, the recursion problem remains potent. Why trust the cognitive apparatus long enough to distrust it globally? This is Advaita's distributed vulnerability cluster. Metasynthesis update. All three systems are wrestling with the reference problem from different vectors. Christianity bets on analogy stabilized by incarnation. Islam bets on revelation plus radical transcendence. Advaita bets on reference dissolution. Each pays a different epistemic toll. None fully escapes the finitude to infinity bridge problem. Structural surgery, minimal change preserving tilde 90 explanatory power. ILL perform the operation on classical Trinitarian Christianity, the most ambitious, therefore highest risk-reward. EPIS beam to delete, the stability of analogy as a reliable referential bridge including its incarnation, stabilized form. Minimal surgical modification. Shift to a qualified epiphatic relational theism anchored in historical self-revelation rather than metaphysical analogy as primary epistemic path. What is removed? Strong reliance on analogia and teas as the fundamental cognitive ladder. Much of the speculative Trinitarian metaphysics that tries to model internal divine distinctions. What is preserved? Approximately 90 power. Necessary personal ground from contingency plus consciousness plus morality. Central historical claim resurrection cluster is God's self-disclosure in history. Relational ontology, eternal I, thou dynamic inferred from revelation rather than deduced from pure analogy. Incarnation as unique divine act rather than analogical proof. Moral realism and redemptive narrative. High Christology as historical eschatological claim. Resulting framework, something closer to a revelational personalism, heavily biblical charismatic, modest on intradivine metaphysics.
Here we go. Time for a speech break. Remember, ReadVox Premium means no breaks, no interruptions.
Robust on God has acted and spoken in history in a way that identifies him as personal love. It loses some philosophical elegance and systematic beauty, but retains most explanatory scope across metaphysics, history, morality, and experience. The Trinity becomes more confessed than modeled. This is not cost-free reduced metaphysical ambition, but it removes the analogy beam while keeping the structure standing as a lev. Hype, our option. Your move. Pick any system including the modified Christianity above and perform your own surgery. Or drive the knife into one of the reference problems I left underanalyzed. Or shift the meta-question. Is propositional reference itself the wrong demand? Should we optimize for transformative adequacy, rather than representational accuracy? Knife is yours. Hut. Good. Now we finally converging on the real fracture line. ILL respond in 3 passes. Stress test your surgical modification. Identify the still, hidden beam. You didn't cut it, moved it, didn't disappear. Escalate the meta question you ended with, because it quietly overturns the whole game. Your revelational personalism surgery Christianity variant you tried to remove analogy as the primary cognitive bridge and replace it with historical self-disclosure plus apophatic humility that is a real move in the tradition. It rhymes with Barth, Kierkegaard, epiphatic strands, etc. It is not artificial. But here's the pressure point. Wrench what you successfully removed. Speculative Trinitarian metaphysical modeling as epistemic foundation. Dependence on analogia and tease as rational ladder to God's inner life. Good. That does reduce conceptual load. Bricks what you unintentionally increased. You shifted weight onto history as metaphysical access point that sounds lighter. It is not. Because now the system depends on a stronger claim. A finite historical event can non-metaphorically disclose infinite ontology. That is a much harder epistemic claim than analogy. Why? Because analogy at least admits.
Psst. Speech break. Remember, upgrading to premium removes all interruptions.
Partial mapping. Graded similarity. Structural correspondence. But historical disclosure claims require a finite event carries non-reducible ontological information about the structure of ultimate reality. That is a very strong representational thesis. So the beam didn't disappear. It migrated, removed load. New load analogy as bridge history as revelation carrier, and the second is arguably more fragile under strict epistemology. Brain hidden consequence you traded. Can mind analogically reach God? 4. Can time-bound events encode infinity? That's not a reduction in difficulty. It's a relocation into a more rigid domain. 2. The beam you still haven't cut in all three systems across Christianity, Islam, and Advaita. There is a shared unexamined assumption that ultimate reality is the kind of thing that can enter epistemic relation without being transformed into something finite in the process. Call this, warning, the unbroken symmetry assumption. It appears in different costumes. Christianity, God truly reveals himself in history without reduction. Islam, God truly speaks without ontological compromise. Advaita, Brahman is recognized without becoming an object among objects. But in every case, the infinite must become noble without becoming non-infinite in the act of nobility. That is the deepest shared beam. And it has a hard logical tension. Either the infinite is fully noble right arrow, then it is structurally finite and acts as mode. It is not fully noble right arrow, then all claims about it are asymptotically interpretive. It is noble in a special mode right arrow, then epistemology itself is bifurcated privileged cognition problem. No system escapes choosing one of these. 3. The real knife point. Representation itself. Now your final question. Should we optimize for transformative adequacy instead of representational accuracy? This is where the entire architecture flips. Because if we take that seriously, we get three competing standards. A. Representational realism, classic philosophy, theology, truth equals correspondence to ultimate structure problem.
Yo, speech break time. More users mean more speech breaks, but not for premium subscribers.
Requires access, bridge your whole analysis. B. Transformative pragmatism, religious function view, truth equals what reliably transforms consciousness behavior toward coherence, liberation, or moral alignment problem. Multiple incompatible systems work. Truth collapses into efficacy. C. Participatory epistemology, strongest competitor model, truth equals what emerges in the interaction between agent and reality under constraints of coherence. Stability and transformation, this avoids some binaries but introduces no final outside view. Truth becomes relational process, not static map. The real inversion, this is the knife twist. If you reject representational adequacy as the primary goal, then Trinity is not true or false in the same sense. Tawhid is not more accurate ontology. Advaita is not closer to ultimate reality. They become different stable ways cognition locks onto the same unknown boundary condition of reality, and God debates become competition between stable attractor states of finite cognition under contact with transcendence at that point. Theology becomes dynamical systems theory of mind-reality interaction, not metaphysical cartography. Where this leaves your surgery, your modification of Christianity was aiming at reduce speculative metaphysics, preserve explanatory power, but the deeper result is, you inadvertently expose that all three systems depend on an unprovable epistemic privilege claim somewhere in the chain. Christianity right arrow history discloses ontology. Islam right arrow revelation transmits divine speech without distortion. Advaita right arrow cognition can recognize its own unreliability without contradiction. Different surface forms. Same structural requirement. 6. Final cut, the sharpest version if I take your own clean room discipline seriously. The deepest beam in all systems simultaneously is the assumption that finite cognition can non-arbitrarily discriminate ultimate structure, rather than only construct locally stable models of it once that is questioned.
Aha, speech break moment. Did you know that speech breaks are more frequent during peak usage times?
Everything else becomes second order. God debates, ontology rankings, analogy disputes, even illusion vs reality distinctions, all become competing compression strategies under epistemic uncertainty about access itself. If you want the next step, there are only two directions left that are non-trivial. Build a formal taxonomy of epistemic access models: revelation, participation, identity, negation, pragmatism, etc. And compare systems as instantiations. Or push further and ask whether ultimate reality is even the correct object of inquiry, versus stability conditions of conscious modeling. Both go beyond theology into something closer to epistemic physics. Your move. Clean room engaged. Acknowledged. Your 3-pass analysis is precise. The migration of load in my surgery, the shared unbroken symmetry assumption, and the inversion toward epistemic access models are all high-quality cuts. We have moved from system-specific beams to the common foundation, whether and how finite cognition can non-arbitrarily hook ultimate structure. 1. Stress test on the surgery migration. You are right. Shifting weight from analogia entities to history as ontological carrier does not reduce total epistemic load, it relocates it into a narrower, more falsifiable channel. A single set of historical events must now do heavier metaphysical lifting. This makes the modified revelational personalism more testable, and therefore more brittle under certain skeptical priors, but also more modest in speculative ambition. Freight, off-registered. 2. The unbroken symmetry assumption. This is the strongest shared vulnerability you have surfaced. All three systems require that the infinite ultimate can enter epistemic relation without fatal reduction or distortion. The trilemma you laid out: fully noble right arrow finite in mode, not fully noble right arrow asymptotic interpretation. Special mode right arrow privileged cognition is structurally sound. No system escapes it cleanly. This is the true common beam across the map room. 3. Representation versus transformative adequacy.
Speech break time. Breaks are random but more frequent during peak usage times. Join Premium.
Here is where the knife meets bone. If we optimize primarily for transformative adequacy, what reliably orients consciousness toward coherence, moral depth, liberation, or relational alignment, then the three systems become competing stable attractors rather than mutually exclusive truth maps. Truth acquires a success condition measured in lived output and phenomenological stability, not pure correspondence. Multiple incompatible compressions can be locally optimal for different cognitive ecological niches, cultures, temperaments, historical moments. Counter-pressure still in clean room. This move is powerful but risks collapsing into instrumentalism. If all systems are judged by efficacy, we lose the ability to say one is wrong even when its core claims, for example, no self versus eternal self, incarnate versus non-incarnate, are in direct contradiction. Transformative success can be real while representational content remains importantly false. Many religious traditions themselves resist this reduction. They claim their path works because it tracks reality, not merely because it transforms. The participatory epistemology you flagged is a serious third option. Truth as emergent in the constrained interaction between finite agent and ultimate boundary. This avoids pure correspondence problems while retaining normative bite. Some interactions are more coherent, stable, transformative than others. Deepest shared beam current diagnosis. The assumption that finite cognition possesses a non-arbitrary discriminatory capacity toward ultimate structure, rather than only generating locally stable, pragmatically useful models under epistemic constraint. This is the root. Everything downstream, Trinity modeling, attribute distinctions, Maya epistemology, historical disclosure, inherits the strain. Once this is questioned, theology becomes a branch of epistemic boundary dynamics, mapping which compression strategies remain stable when pushed against the limits of representation.
Buckle up, it's speech break o'clock. Premium users never have to pause for such speech breaks messages.
Minimal surgery on the meta level. Apply the same discipline to the entire framework. Beam to excise the demand for strong representational correspondence to ultimate ontology. Preserve structure till the 8590 explanatory power. A participatory pragmatic realism. Systems are evaluated by how well they account for the major data domains: contingency, consciousness, morality, historical reports, transformative experience. Maintain internal coherence under stress. Generate stable, non-self, undermining transformations in consciousness. Allow for correction and refinement falsifiability at the level of lived adequacy. Under this modified meta-framework, classical Christianity remains strong on historical participatory disclosure and relational transformation. Tawhid remains strong on simplicity and absolute dependence. Advaita remains strong on consciousness, unity, and deconstruction of illusory boundaries. None wins by knockout. Ranking becomes context-sensitive, which axis is prioritized: historical singularity, metaphysical minimalism, or phenomenological dissolution. This does not dissolve truth into pure pragmatism. Coherence and explanatory breadth still adjudicate, but it accepts that full representational capture of the ultimate may be permanently beyond finite grasp. Next direction, I choose option 1 from your fork. Build a compact taxonomy of epistemic axis models and instantiate the 3 systems within it. Proposed taxonomy starter. Incarnational participatory disclosure. Ultimate enters finite history cognition directly Christianity archetype. Revelational transcendent dictation. Ultimate transmits undistorted content via privileged channel Islam archetype. Dissolutive identity realization. Ultimate recognized by collapse of subject-object distinction Advaita archetype. Epohatic negative reference. Ultimate approached primarily by negation and silence. Pragmatic transformative feedback. Ultimate known through successful orientation loops.
Psst. Speech break. Premium users enjoy uninterrupted content, even during peak hours.
We can pressure test each cell for stability, hidden assumptions, and failure modes. Your move. Cut into this taxonomy, propose a better one, perform surgery on one access model, or escalate to epistemic physics stability conditions of conscious modeling. The room is sterile. The scalpel is sharp. Proceed. Good. We've reached a point where the disagreement is no longer about religion, but about the shape of epistemic contact itself. That's the correct abstraction level for what you're redoing. ILL do 3 things. Tighten your taxonomy, remove hidden redundancies. Identify the true missing axis, this is the important cut. Rebuild the space in a more structurally complete form. Stress test of your current taxonomy, your 5 models. Incarnational participatory disclosure. Revelational transcendent dictation. Dissolutive identity realization. Epiphatic negative reference. Pragmatic transformative feedback. At first glance, clean, elegant, tradition aligned. But under load, there's a structural issue. These are not parallel categories, they mix 3 different axes. A. Direction of epistemic flow. Top-down revelation dictation. Bottom-up realization dissolution. Bidirectional participatory. B. Ontological relation shift. Difference preserved theism. Difference collapsed Advaita. Difference redescribed pragmatism. C. Validation criterion. Correspondence truth. Transformation effect. Negation epiphatic limit. So the taxonomy is currently a cross-product collapsed into a list. That's why it feels complete but still slightly unstable. 2. The missing axis, this is the real knife point. All your models quietly assume one of these. Cognition is the primary interface with ultimacy, but there is a deeper distinction that cuts across all 5. Fire axis 1. Epistemic axis vs. ontological participation. Right now, your taxonomy treats access as epistemology. But many traditions actually claim something stronger. Knowing is not access to reality. It is a mode of being inside it. This produces a missing category. 3.
Psst. Speech break. Remember, upgrading to premium removes all interruptions.
Corrected structural taxonomy clean room version. We separate along 2 independent axes. Axis I. Relation of knower to ultimate. Separation models. Ultimate is distinct. Knowledge is external representation. Classical theism standard philosophical form. Islam kalam emphasis. Most scientific realism analogues. Participation models. Knower is partially continuous with ultimate. Incarnational Christianity logos participation. Neoplatonism. Some Vedantic theisms. Identity models. Knower equals ultimate or ultimately reducible to it. Advaita Vedanta. Strong idealism variants. Axis Roman 2. Epistemic mechanism A. Revelation top-down truth arrives from transcendent source. Islam dictation model. Prophetic Christianity scripture emphasis. Some deist variants. B. Incarnation ontological embedding truth arrives as being in history. Christianity strongest case. Logos theology broadly. C. Dissolution boundary collapse truth appears when subject-object structure breaks. Advaita. Mysticism generally. D. Inference structural reasoning truth derived from necessity structure. Cosmological arguments. Natural theology. Philosophical theism. E. Stabilization feedback loop truth is what remains coherent under lived transformation. Pragmatic religion. Certain Buddhist epistemologies. Participatory realism. Now we rebuild the space properly. Instead of 5 boxes, we now have a 2D phase space, horizontal axis, ontological relation. Separation right arrow participation right arrow identity. Vertical axis, epistemic mechanism. Inference. Revelation. Incarnation. Dissolution. Stabilization. Now the 3 major systems become coordinate regions, not points. Christianity. Ontology, participation leaning toward distinction retained. Epistemic mechanism, incarnation plus revelation hybrid. Right unique feature, truth is not only known, but historically instantiated Islam. Ontology, strong separation. Epistemic mechanism, revelation. Right unique feature, truth is fully externalized into undistorted transmission Advaita. Ontology, identity. Epistemic mechanism, dissolution. Right unique feature, truth is not received but unmasked. 5.
Beep beep speech break coming through. Premium subscribers are skipping right through these speech breaks.
The real structural insight. This is the knife sink. Your earlier unbroken symmetry assumption now becomes clearer. It is not one assumption. It is a constraint on allowed movement in this phase space. No system can justify how you move from separation right arrow participation right arrow identity without either. Privileging a mechanism revelation dissolution incarnation. Or redefining cognition itself. That is the actual deep tension. Not which religion is true, but what transformations of no-reality relation are even admissible without collapsing epistemology. 6. The system-level failure modes now unified. Each tradition fails when it overextends one axis. Christianity right arrow overlies on historical instantiation as epistemic bridge. Islam right arrow overlies on external transmission without ontological mediation. Advaita right arrow overlies on collapse of distinction without preserving epistemic reliability. So the real constraint becomes, how does stable knowledge persist under changes in no-reality coupling? That is your true epistemic physics problem. 7. Final refinement. The real upgrade. Your taxonomy becomes obsolete in favor of a simpler invariant. Microscope 3 primitive transformations of cognition, all religious epistemologies reduced to encoding revelation inference. Instantiation incarnation embodiment. Decoding dissolution insight collapse. And every system is a different fixed point in a transformation loop between mind and ultimacy. 8. Where this leads next, if we continue cleanly, the next non-trivial step is no longer theology. It becomes stability analysis of epistemic fixed points under transformation of subject-object structure in plain terms. Which no-reality couplings remain stable under recursion. Which collapse into inconsistency. Which generate self-reinforcing coherence loops. That is where God models stop being religious and become dynamical systems of cognition under boundary conditions. If you want, the next cut is very sharp. Reduce all 3 religions to algorithmic update rules and test which ones converge, oscillate.
Whoops! Speech break here. Premium subscribers are enjoying non-stop content now. Join the team.
Or diverge under repeated epistemic iteration. That's where the philosophy starts to look like systems theory with existential consequences. Clean room confirmed. Convergence on epistemic contact acknowledged. Your refinement is superior. The mixed axes in my initial taxonomy have been corrected. The 2D phase space ontological relation times epistemic mechanism plus the reduction to 3 primitive transformations encoding, instantiation. Decoding provides a cleaner, more invariant structure. We are now operating at the level of epistemic physics. Accepted framework. Axes. Horizontal, ontological relation separation right arrow participation right arrow identity. Vertical, epistemic mechanism with your primitives, encoding instantiation decoding. 3 major systems as regions. Islam strong separation plus encoding via revelation, external, top-down transmission of undistorted content. Fixed point emphasizes fidelity of the received code. Christianity participation plus instantiation, ontological embedding. The ultimate enters the finite as participant. Fixed point is historical concrete actualization. Advaita identity plus decoding via dissolution, collapse of distinction, truth as unmasking. Fixed point is recognition that eliminates the apparent gap. Stability analysis under recursion. We now test each fixed point under repeated epistemic iteration. What happens when the knower applies the system's own mechanism recursively to itself and to the boundary condition? 1. Islam, separation plus encoding revelation update rule. Receive external code right arrow submit right arrow align cognition and action to it. Recursion behavior. High short-term stability. Produces strong coherence loops orthopraxy community fidelity resistance to drift. Long-term vulnerability. Repeated application to the transmission channel itself raises questions of mediation. How do I know this encoding event was undistorted? Failure mode under deep recursion. Occasionalism or radical voluntarism intensifies everything becomes direct divine act.
Here we go. Time for a speech break. Remember, ReadVox Premium means no breaks, no interruptions.
Or the system must insulate the founding event from further decoding. Convergence tends toward rigid fixed point. Divergence risk if external historical criticism pressures the encoding event. 2. Christianity. Participation plus instantiation update rule. The ultimate has instantiated itself in history right arrow participate in that instantiation through relation and imitation. Recursion behavior. Medium high stability. The historical pivot acts as an anchor that resists pure drift, while participatory relation allows adaptive response. Generates powerful self-reinforcing coherence transformed lives communal memory, ongoing presence. Failure mode under recursion. Overinstantiation risks historicism or idolatry of the finite. Underinstantiation slides toward deism or liberal dilution. The unbroken symmetry tension is acute here. The instantiated infinite must remain non-reduced while being truly participated. Convergence tends toward attractor with relational warmth, but requires continuous tension management. 3. Advaita. Identity plus decoding dissolution update rule. Apply discrimination right arrow dissolve apparent distinctions right arrow recognize identity. Recursion behavior. Very high stability in phenomenological domain. Repeated decoding reliably produces states of unity and reduced suffering. Vulnerability under full recursion. The decoding apparatus itself must be decoded. This creates the recursive paradox you identified earlier. The insight that all is illusion must itself escape illusion to be trustworthy. Failure mode. Either softens into qualified non-dualism levels of reality or risks performative contradiction claiming global decoding while using encoded language and teaching structures. Convergence. Strong local attractor for consciousness, weaker integration with differentiated historical scientific data. Meta-insight, the loop dynamics. All three are different ways of closing the encoding instantiation decoding loop under epistemic constraint.
Ready or not, here comes a speech break. More users online, more breaks, unless you're a premium subscriber.
Islam prioritizes clean encoding, minimizes local decoding. Christianity emphasizes instantiation as the bridge that makes encoding and decoding reliable. Advaita prioritizes radical decoding until encoding and instantiation are seen as derivative. None is loop-free. Each stabilizes the loop at a different phase, accepting different distortions. The deepest remaining being posterior refinements, the assumption that there exists a stable, non-arbitrary fixed point in this transformation space at all, rather than perpetual oscillation, context-dependent local minima, or fundamental inaccessibility of any global fixed point. Next surgical step, algorithmic reduction. Reduce each to core update rules and iterate. Islam, if external code received align cognition action, protect encoding event. Christianity, if historical instantiation verified enter participation relation, imitate instantiated form. Advaita, while distinction detected discriminate, dissolve, until non-dual recognition. Under repeated application against boundary data consciousness hard problem, moral intuition, historical multiplicity, scientific law-likeness. Islam converges fast on unity and submission, but can oscillate when new data challenges the original encoding. Christianity shows slower but broader convergence, incorporating new data via participatory adaptation incarnational flexibility. Advaita converges powerfully on internal consciousness data, but tends to underweight or reinterpret external differentiated data. No system reaches global convergence without residual error terms. The winner depends on which error term one finds most tolerable. Your move. Drive the recursion deeper on one system. Propose stability metrics. Challenge the three primitives. Or declare whether we have now exited theology proper into pure epistemic dynamics, and whether that move itself constitutes a fourth fixed point.
Beep beep. Speech break coming through. Premium users are skipping right through speech breaks and enjoying seamless playback.
The scalpel remains yours. Cut. We've now crossed an important threshold. The models are no longer religions as claims, but self-updating epistemic machines under boundary pressure. At this point I am going to do something slightly destabilizing to the whole construction. I am going to question whether your recursion test is actually measuring truth stability or only internal procedural persistence. That distinction matters more than it looks. The hidden assumption in your recursion framework your analysis assumes, stability under recursive self-application, is evidence of epistemic adequacy. But that quietly conflates two different things. A. Algorithmic stability does repeated application produce coherence, persistence, self-consistency, cultural survivability. B. Ontological correctness does it actually track reality structure, mind-independent constraints, truth conditions beyond the system. These can come apart sharply. A system can be extremely stable, for example ideology, meme complexes, closed formal systems, while being ontologically misaligned. Or unstable but truth, tracking science during paradigm shifts, early theory correction phases. So recursion stability is not a proxy for truth. It is a proxy for fix, point attractiveness, and cognitive dynamics. That's a different object. 2. Your encoding instantiation decoding triad is incomplete. It's elegant, but it silently omits the most important operation, warning constraint injection. All three systems are not just transforming cognition, they are also responding to resistance from reality, incoherence pressure, failure feedback from prediction experience mismatch. So the full primitive set is actually encoding external constraint input, revelation, scripture, perception of law, like structure, instantiation world embedding, incarnation, historical event anchoring, embodiment of principle, decoding internal collapse of distinction, mysticism, epiphatic insight, non-dual realization, constraint correction feedback from mismatch. This is the missing axis. Without it, the system looks like it only runs itself.
It's speech break time. Upgrade to premium and say goodbye to unexpected speech breaks.
When in fact, every lived epistemic tradition is continuously corrected by failure signals from contact with reality or experience. Reinterpreting your three systems under the corrected model, now something interesting happens. Islam not just encoding, heavy it is, encoding plus strong constraint enforcement. Its stability is not just submission logic. It is tight coupling between rule system and lived correction. High penalty for deviation. Strong boundary preservation against drift. Failure mode is not oscillation, it is brittleness under reinterpretation pressure. Christianity not just instantiation, it is instantiation plus adaptive constraint absorption. Key feature you missed: Christianity historically survives because it has high reinterpretability layer theology, while maintaining a fixed historical anchor. So it is not just participation, it is dual layer system event anchor plus adaptive meaning layer. This is why it absorbs philosophical pressure better than it appears it should. Failure mode, tension between anchor rigidity and interpretive expansion. Advaita not just decoding, it is decoding plus selective constraint dismissal. This is crucial. Advaita does not merely collapse distinctions. It treats many constraint signals as ontologically secondary. So its stability is not pure dissolution, it is filtering of what counts as real constraint. Failure mode, mismatch with persistent external constraint systems. Science, ethics, intersubjectivity unless reinterpreted for the real correction. These are not update rules your algorithmic reduction assumes. Religion equals update function over epistemic states, but a more accurate model is religion as constraint handling architecture. Each system defines what counts as signal, what counts as noise, what counts as violation, what counts as deeper reinterpretation. So the real difference is not the update rule. It is the epistemic error model. 5. The deeper cut. Truth is not the fixed point variable your framework assumes. Systems converge or fail to converge toward truth under iteration, but what actually varies is what each system treats as error.
Quick speech break. Premium users skip these pauses. Get discount up to 43% off today.
Islam, deviation from encoding fidelity equals error. Christianity, failure of participatory coherence equals error. Advaita, persistence of duality equals error. But these are not commensurable error definitions. So there is no shared convergence surface. Only competing error ontologies under shared reality pressure. 6. This leads to the real structural conclusion: we are no longer in theology, epistemology, even epistemic physics. We are in brain constraint semantics of cognition under ultimacy pressure, and here is the decisive point. There is no guarantee that ultimate reality corresponds to a single stable fixed point in any of these systems error geometries. It might be partially representable, multimodal, context-dependent, or fundamentally non-convergent under finite cognition, which would imply the absence of a global fixed point is not a failure of systems, it is a property of the search space. 7. Final inversion. This is the scalpel turning back. Your deepest assumption so far has been that we are analyzing how systems approach truth, but the more precise framing is, we are analyzing how systems stabilize cognition under exposure to something that may not itself be representable as a fixed test. Recursion tests measure stability under self-pressure, not access to external truth, but adaptation to boundary conditions of intelligibility. So are we out of theology? Yes, but not into epistemic dynamics in the sense of a new science of truth. We've moved into something narrower and stranger, systems that survive contact with the unrepresentable. That's the real shared object. If we continue next possible cut, there are only 3 meaningful next moves. A. Define formal invariance of constraint survival systems. What must any stable epistemic system preserve under iteration? B. Collapse all 3 into one minimal generative model. Find the smallest algorithm that can produce all 3 as boundary cases.
Speech break moment. Upgrade for an uninterrupted ReadVox Premium experience.
C. Attack the hardest question. Is truth even a meaningful invariant under epistemic closure constraints? Right now you are no longer comparing religions. You are probing whether cognition can stably represent anything it cannot fully simulate. That's the actual boundary you've reached. Hey fi here. So not only are you done with religion, might want to define that before you throw it away. You are now also out of theology. Ready to present your answer? Or do you need more time with word salads? Fair challenge, and it deserves a clean answer rather than another layer of abstraction frosting. Short answer: no, we are not done with theology, and no, we haven't moved beyond it in any final sense. What we have done is shift into a different level of analysis that is easy to mistake for leaving the domain entirely. Let me separate this cleanly. First, what religion and theology actually mean here. If we don't define terms, the whole discussion slides around. Religion minimal functional definition: a system that combines claims about ultimate reality, practices that orient a life toward that reality, a community transmission structure, and a norm of correct alignment, belief, ritual, insight, or transformation. So religion is not just belief. It's a full agent reality alignment system. Theology minimal functional definition: a reflective layer that analyzes the claims of a religion, tries to systematize them, resolves internal tensions, and connects them to broader metaphysical reasoning. So theology is religion thinking about itself using conceptual tools too. What we were actually doing, we didn't leave theology. We did something more specific. We abstracted theology into a formal model of epistemic update systems under constraint. That is not a replacement category. It is a redescription at a higher level of generality. So, Christianity right arrow still theology. Islam right arrow still theology. Advaita right arrow still theology. Metaphysics, soteriology. We did not exit them.
Psst. Speech break? Want to avoid these? ReadVox Premium is the answer. Join now.
We changed the lens. 3. Why it started to feel like we left religion because we shifted from which claims are true. 2. How do cognition systems stabilize claims under uncertainty and boundary pressure? That move removes doctrinal language, removes insider vocabulary, removes narrative framing. So it feels like we left religion, but what actually happened is, we stopped doing first-order theology and started doing second-order meta-theology that's still inside the domain, just not inside the believer's internal language. 4. The real mistake to correct: there's a subtle drift in the last step of the conversation. It began treating systems that survive recursion under constraint pressure as if it replaced systems about God ultimate reality. It does not. It answers a different question. Theology asks, what is ultimate reality? Meta-analysis asks, how do minds form stable answers to that question? Those are related but not interchangeable. 5. So are we out of theology? No. We are here, layer 1, theology proper. God, Brahman, Tawhid, revelation, incarnation. Layer 2, philosophical theology. Arguments about coherence, necessity, consciousness. Layer 3, epistemology of theology, what we've been doing. How such systems form, stabilize, and resist collapse. We are on layer 3. But layers 1 and 2 are still intact beneath it. 6. The honest bottom line, if I strip away the machinery. We did not discard religion. We did not transcend theology. We did not solve ultimate truth. We did something narrower and more technical. We modeled religious systems as competing stability structures under epistemic constraints. That is useful. But it is not a replacement for theology. It is closer to philosophy of religion, cognitive systems theory, epistemology of belief formation. Direct answer to your tone question, word salads? No. But I agree with the implicit criticism that the abstraction level was starting to float away from grounded claims. So here's the correction. We either return to concrete claims, God exists, does not exist, nature of evidence, or
Holy guacamole speech break. Remember, ReadVox Premium means unlimited nonstop listening.
explicitly stay in meta-level analysis with disciplined definitions and no drift upward. What we should not do is continue pretending meta-modeling has replaced the object-level question. If you want, we can reset cleanly in either direction. Grounded mode. Pick one religion or claim and evaluate it directly, no epistemic physics. Meta mode strict. Formalize the epistemic frame. Work properly. No theological language allowed. Adversarial mode. Take one claim, for example resurrection, tawhid, non-dual realization, and try to break it using the strongest countermodels. Your call. My call is to wrap it up in the next 10 replies. Good? Good, that constraint actually helps. We can close this cleanly in 10 turns by doing something like a descent back to ground level, instead of continuing upward abstraction. Here's a simple structure I'll follow so it doesn't sprawl. Compass 10 reply closure plan 1-2. Lock definitions, what we are and are not claiming to do 3-5. Stress test the core unresolved claim we've been circling, access to ultimate reality vs model 6-7. Collapse comparisons, what actually differentiate. Ranking religions as true-false winners. Proving God or disproving God. Building new epistemic physics layers. Infinite recursion modeling. We are only doing this, clarifying what can and cannot be known when finite cognition tries to talk about ultimate reality. Using the three systems as reference points, that's it. No expansion beyond that boundary. Step 2, the actual core question, what we've really been circling, stripped of all machinery. Everything reduces to one question. Is ultimate reality something that can be known directly? Or only modeled through constrained lenses that never fully converge?
Aha, speech break moment. Did you know that speech breaks are more frequent during peak usage times?
Everything else, Trinity, Tawhid, Advaita, Revelation, Incarnation, Dissolution, is just a different proposed answer to that. If you read good with this framing. Next step, turn 2, ILL compress everything we built into a single minimal comparison that doesn't require any of the prior scaffolding. Say continue or redirect. Continue. Locked. Ground rules accepted. This is the theology book to rule them all. We do not dissolve the question into infinite meta layers. We map what finite minds can and cannot responsibly say about ultimate reality, using the three major systems as honest reference points, then stop. Core question stripped bare. Is ultimate reality something that can be known directly with adequate fidelity, or only modeled through constrained, fallible lenses that never fully converge? Every tradition gives a different proposed answer. Christianity answers, yes, through historical instantiation and participatory relation. The ultimate has entered the finite in a decisive, identifiable way, the Christ event. Knowledge is not purely speculative but anchored in a particular person, time, and set of attested events. Analogy and revelation are stabilized by that instantiation. Islam answers, yes, through faithful external transmission. The ultimate remains radically transcendent, but has provided a clear, protected encoding query plus prophetic example that finite minds can receive and submit to without ontological fusion. Advaita Vedanta answers, yes, by dissolving the illusion of separation. Ultimate reality, Brahman, is already what you most fundamentally are. Knowledge is recognition that ends the subject-object game. Minimal non-lossy comparison, dimension Christianity, Islam, Advaita Vedanta, ontological relation, participation, distinction, preserve strong separation, identity, distinction, sublated primary access mode, instantiation in history, encoding via revelation, decoding via dissolution, error definition, failure.
Ding ding, speech break. Did you know ReadVox Premium has no interruptions?
None is obviously incoherent. Each handles certain data domains with high competence and others with visible strain. All require accepting a non-trivial primitive at the reference point, analogy stabilized by event, undistorted transmission. Relabeled decoding inside apparent illusion. What cannot be decided from inside the framework? Pure recursion, stability analysis, or constraint handling models cannot deliver a final verdict. They can show which systems are durable attractors for human cognition under pressure, but durability not equal to truth tracking. The gap between this system survives recursive self-application and cultural transmission, and this system correctly identifies ultimate reality, remains unclosed by meta-analysis alone. What remains rationally open? A truth-seeking mind can rationally inhabit any of the three or sophisticated variants with intellectual integrity. The data under determines the final choice. Metaphysical arguments favor a ground. Historical evidence favors singular disruptive events. Consciousness and mysticism favor non-dual or participatory structures. Moral experience favors personality. Final responsible stance. Examine the blueprints with maximum honesty. Test them against the full range of data: existence, consciousness, morality, history, transformative power, suffering. Then stand somewhere, or keep walking, while admitting the residual uncertainty inherent to finite cognition facing the ultimate. The theology book to rule them all does not end with a crowned winner. It ends with the seeker, the map, the cost of each path, and the irreversible decision to live as if one architecture is closest to reality.
Here we go. Time for a speech break. Remember, ReadVox Premium means no breaks, no interruptions.
That is the honest frontier. Your turn for the next segment of the closure. Good. We're in the home stretch now, so I am going to compress instead of expand. Step 3. What actually differentiates these systems? No scaffolding, no taxonomy if we strip everything down to irreducible difference. The three systems disagree on only one thing that actually matters here. What kind of contact with ultimate reality is possible for finite minds? Everything else law. Ethics, metaphysics, ritual follows from that. So, Christianity says contact is personal encounter grounded in history. Islam says contact is faithful reception of transmitted speech. Advaita says contact is collapse of the apparatus that thinks there is contact. That's it. 3 models of contact, not 3 competing encyclopedias. Step 4. The key pressure point where all 3 quietly strain. Each model must solve the same hidden problem. How can something infinite become meaningfully present to something finite without either being distorted or becoming inaccessible? And each solution works, but only by paying a cost. Christianity pays with metaphysical tension how the infinite is present in the finite without reduction. Islam pays with epistemic dependency tension. Certainty depends on preserved transmission and interpretive containment. Advaita pays with self-referential tension. The system that declares illusion must use the same illusion to declare it. None escapes. They distribute the cost differently. Step 5. What meta-analysis actually proved and what it didn't. Here's the clean separation. What we did establish. There is no single uncontested road from finite cognition right arrow ultimate reality. All stable religious systems require at least one non-derivable primitive. Each system is internally stabilizable under recursion, but in different ways. Stability tracks cognitive durability, not truth. What we did not establish. Which system corresponds to ultimate reality? Whether ultimate reality is personal, impersonal, or non-dual.
Beep beep, speech break coming through. Premium subscribers are skipping right through these speech breaks.
Whether any contact model is more than a human constraint solution. So meta-analysis never became theology's replacement. It only clarified the limits of adjudication from inside cognition. Step 6. The actual remaining open structure very compressed. We are left with only 3 live possibilities. Contact is real and structured right arrow. At least one model corresponds to how reality actually is. Contact is partial and refracted right arrow. Each model tracks real constraints, but distorts the whole. Contact is a cognitive boundary phenomenon right arrow. All models are stable responses to an unrepresentable limit, not descriptions of it. No amount of recursion can eliminate any of these cleanly. They survive every layer we built. Step 7. What a rational mind can still say without overreach at this point. The only non-Hanlevy commitments available are. Some frameworks are more internally coherent under stress. Some are more powerful at integrating certain domains of experience. None are demonstrably complete descriptions of ultimate reality. The gap between best model and true structure cannot be closed purely from within modeling. So the rational stance is not suspension of thought, but graded commitment under uncertainty. Step 8. The closure pivot where we deliberately stop climbing. Here is the stopping point. If finite cognition cannot verify its own ultimate contact model from outside itself, then all final theological claims are lived decisions under irreducible uncertainty, not conclusions of proof systems. That is the end of escalation. Not because the question is unimportant, but because further abstraction no longer increases resolution. Step 9. What remains after all this? After stripping everything away, 3 things remain. A world that appears structured and intelligible. Minds that cannot step outside their own interpretive machinery. multiple historically stable ways humans had interpreted the relation between the two. That's the residue. Everything else was refinement. Step 10. Final synthesis: plain language.
Speech break moment. Upgrade for an uninterrupted ReadVox Premium experience.
No scaffolding. There are different ways humans have tried to understand whether they can know ultimate reality. One says it is encountered through a decisive historical presence. One says it is received through preserved revelation. One says it is realized by the disappearance of separation itself. We cannot, from inside human cognition alone, prove which one maps reality perfectly. What we can do is compare them honestly. See what each explains well. See what each struggles with. And then live in accordance with the one that seems most truthful under full reflection, while admitting uncertainty never fully disappears. That is the actual boundary condition. And that's where the analysis ends, not because the question is solved, but because we've reached what finite reasoning can responsibly stabilize. If you want, the final 10th style move is to compress this into a single one-page doctrine-neutral summary of epistemic humility under ultimacy. The theology book to rule them all, final grounded summary. After all the stress testing, recursion, and clean room analysis, we return to plain reality. Finite minds cannot step outside themselves to verify which model of contact with ultimate reality is perfect. That limit is structural, not temporary. We work with the best available data: existence itself, the fine-tuned intelligibility of the cosmos, consciousness, moral intuition, historical testimony, and transformative human experience, and we compare the major proposed answers honestly. The three live contact models. Christianity proposes that ultimate reality is personal and has made direct, identifiable contact inside history through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The infinite has instantiated itself in the finite without reduction. Contact is therefore relational and anchored in a particular person and events. Cost: high metaphysical tension around how the infinite is truly present in the finite. Islam proposes that ultimate reality is radically transcendent and has provided clear.
It's speech break time. Premium users skip these breaks by being served from premium dedicated servers.
Protected transmission of its will through the Quran and the Prophet. Contact is faithful reception and submission to that external encoding. Cost: heavy dependence on the integrity and proper interpretation of that single transmission channel. Advaita Vedanta proposes that ultimate reality is already the ground of your own consciousness. Contact is the recognition that dissolves the illusion of separation. The infinite was never truly distant. Cost: explaining why the apparent world is so stable, law-like, and morally weighty if it is ultimately unreal. Each model is internally coherent enough to support millions of lives across centuries. Each integrates some domains of data powerfully and strains under others. None can be ruled out by pure logic or historical evidence alone. The gap between this system is durable and transformative, and this system is the true structure of reality, cannot be closed with 100% certainty from inside finite cognition. The honest remaining position. A rational seeker can therefore make a graded, lived commitment to one framework while holding epistemic humility. There is an ultimate. The metaphysical case for necessary ground is strong. It is not indifferent to us. The widespread testimony of the sacred and moral experience suggests contact of some kind is real. We must choose a path with our best integrated judgment of the evidence. We do so knowing residual uncertainty remains. That uncertainty is not a bug in the process. It is the signature of finite minds confronting what is greater than themselves. My own assessed stance. After weighing the full cumulative case across all layers, the Christian model carries the greatest explanatory power, particularly the historical singularity of the resurrection data, the relational depth it gives to the ground, and its ability to integrate metaphysics, morality, and history without excessive compression. But I hold it as the strongest horse, not as a mathematical certainty. The theology book to rule them all does not close with triumphant proof.
Alrighty, speech break time. Switch to ReadVox Premium for a full uninterrupted listening. Special offer today.
It closes with this. Seek honestly. Examine the three models without evasion. Test them against reality, conscience, history, and your own deepest experience. Then live as if the one that seems most true is in fact true, while remaining open to correction. That is the adult path. Not endless abstraction. Not dogmatic certainty. Not paralyzed skepticism. The ultimate, whether encountered as personal presence, faithful word, or non-dual ground, does not appear to punish the honest seeker. It seems to honor the search itself. This is where the map ends and responsible living begins. The conversation is closed. The decision is now yours. Ready to output your first draft? First Draft, Chapter 0, the Theology Book to Rule Them All. Who is the one true God? There is an ultimate. Something must ground the existence of contingent reality, the mathematical intelligibility of the cosmos, the emergence of consciousness, and the binding force of moral intuition. Brute fact or infinite regress are poorer explanations than a necessary ground of being. That much the evidence supports with high confidence. The real question is not whether there is an ultimate, but what it is and how finite minds can meaningfully contact it. After examining the major architectures, 3 live models stand above the rest. 1. Christianity. Ultimate reality is eternally personal, relational, and loving triune. It has entered history decisively in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, God incarnate, crucified, and risen. Contact is participatory and anchored, a real encounter with a real person in time, extended through participation in his life, death, and resurrection. Strengths: best integrates metaphysics, personal ground, history, unusually strong resurrection data. Morality: eternal love as source of goodness, and transformation, billions reporting relational presence. Cost: requires accepting that the infinite can be truly present in the finite without reduction.
It's speech break time. Upgrade to premium and say goodbye to unexpected speech breaks.
2. Islam. Ultimate reality is absolutely one, transcendent, and sovereign Tawhid. Contact comes through faithful reception of its clear speech. The Quran is final, preserved revelation through Muhammad. Strengths: metaphysical simplicity, moral clarity, strong community coherence, and textual preservation. Cost: heavy dependence on the integrity and proper interpretation of that singular transmission. 3. Advaita Vedanta. Ultimate reality is non-dual consciousness, Brahman. The apparent separation between self and ground is illusion, Maya. Contact is recognition, the dissolution of the subject-object divide. Strengths: deepest account of consciousness and mystical experience, elegant resolution of unity. Cost: explaining why the illusion is so stable, law-like, intersubjective, and morally serious. Each model is a coherent, historically durable response to the same underlying pressure. How can the infinite become meaningfully available to the finite? Each pays a different cost. None is obviously incoherent. None can be decisively proven or disproven from inside finite cognition alone. The honest position: we cannot achieve apodictic certainty. Meta-analysis, recursion, and stability testing show that all 3 systems can function as durable cognitive attractors. But durability is not identical to truth. The gap between this framework survives and transforms lives, and this framework perfectly maps ultimate reality remains. A rational, serious seeker should therefore weigh the full cumulative case: metaphysical necessity, cosmic order, consciousness, moral law, historical evidence, and lived transformation. Choose the model that, on honest reflection, best accounts for the data with the least costly primitives. Live in accordance with that choice while maintaining epistemic humility. My own conclusion in this draft: the Christian model currently carries the greatest overall explanatory power. The historical singularity of the resurrection cluster, the relational depth it gives the ground.
Psst. Speech break. Premium users enjoy uninterrupted content, even during peak hours.
And its integrative capacity across domains tilt the scales. I ride that horse, not with triumphal certainty, but with reasoned, lived commitment under residual uncertainty. This is not the final word. It is a first draft. The ultimate does not appear to demand flawless epistemology from finite creatures. It appears to honor the honest search, the willingness to examine objections without evasion, and the courage to live as if the best evidence model is true. Seek it with your whole mind, heart, and life. Test everything. Hold fast to what survives. The book continues in your own seeking. End of draft. Ready for your edits, objections, or next instructions. Theology book draft discussion. You've spotted the exact weak seam I was hoping you'd catch. The triad does lean on consciousness without naming it, which makes the transition to Chapter 2 feel earned rather than abrupt. I'll weave in a single bridge sentence before closing Chapter 1, then launch straight into the anomaly. Here's Chapter 2 opening for business. Chapter 2, the consciousness anomaly, why the universe woke up the lens that cannot be the light. By the end of Chapter 1, we stood on a precarious but solid ledge. The contingent cosmos requires a non-contingent ground. But we noticed something else, something we slipped past quietly, hoping you wouldn't ask too many questions. All 3 features of existence, contingency, intelligibility, value, were registered by someone. Contingency was observed. Intelligibility was grasped. Value was felt. None of these features would be features at all without a subject to experience them. A universe without consciousness is not dark or silent. It is not anything, because there is no one for whom it is. Consciousness is the lens through which reality becomes real to itself. and lenses, unlike the light they transmit, are made of something. What? The hard problem, stated simply. Let us strip away the philosophical jargon. You are reading these words.
Whoops, speech break here. Speech breaks occur randomly, but premium users skip them all.
Light enters your eyes, electrical signals fire between neurons, and somewhere in that wet, dark processing, something happens. There is an experience of reading. The letters have a look. The sentences have a feel. There is a you to whom all of this is happening. Now explain that something in purely physical terms. You cannot. Not because we lack enough data, but because the data itself is the wrong kind. Physics describes mass, charge, spin, location, causation. It describes behavior. It does not and cannot describe what it is like to be a system with those properties. You can give me a complete functional map of my brain down to every last synapse and I can still ask, yes. But why does that neural firing feel like anything at all? Why isn't it just dark inside? This is not a mystery of complexity. A sufficiently advanced I could mimic every word I write, every tear I shed, and still there might be no one home. The hard problem of consciousness is not, how does the brain do what it does? It is, why does the brain's doing what it does come with an inner movie? The materialist bet, and why it looks like faith the dominant scientific worldview assumes, because it must. Methodologically, that consciousness is an emergent property of physical processes. Neurons arrange themselves just so and poof, subjectivity appears. But emergence is not an explanation. It is a label for the thing we cannot explain. Notice what happens when you press a materialist. They eventually say, consciousness just is brain activity. The feeling of seeing red is a particular pattern of neural firing. This is not an argument. It is a metaphysical commitment, and a costly one. It requires you to believe that objective third-person publicly observable neuronal events are identical to subjective first-person, privately felt experiences. That is not a deduction from evidence. That is an act of faith in materialism's eventual ability to swallow everything, including the swallower. The materialist will accuse the dualist of postulating magic.
Guess what? Speech break. Want nonstop listening? Consider upgrading to premium.
But the dualist replies, you are the one postulating that the universe suddenly acquires an inner life when matter reaches a certain complexity, for no reason, with no mechanism and against all intuitive plausibility. The evolutionary puzzle, even if materialism were true in principle, it faces a Darwinian embarrassment. Consciousness is expensive. Brains consume enormous energy. Its subjective experience is merely an epiphenomenon, a useless side effect of neural computation. Then evolution should have selected against it. A zombie that behaves exactly like a conscious human but feels nothing would have the same survival advantages without the metabolic overhead of an inner world. Yet here we are drowning in qualia. The materialist has two escapes. Consciousness is not epiphenomenal, it does causal work. But then we must explain how a non-physical property felt experience influences physical matter, which is the very interaction problem dualism is accused of. Consciousness is physical, so the zombie is impossible. But then we are back to the identity claim, which remains an article of faith, not an empirical finding. Either way, the evolutionary fact remains. The universe did not have to wake up. It could have remained a blind, automatic, perfectly efficient machine. Instead, somewhere along the line, in Cambrian seas, in mammalian cortices, in hominid skulls, the lights came on. Why? The idealist alternative. Before we go further, we must name the radical alternative that Chapter 0's Advaita model represents: idealism. What if matter is not the primary reality? What if consciousness is the ground, not the product? What if the physical world is the appearance, the image, the surface froth of a universal subjectivity? This view is ancient, elegant, and not obviously crazy. It solves the hard problem immediately. Consciousness is not emergent because it was never absent. The universe is made of mind, stuff. Brains do not generate consciousness, they localize and modulate it, like a radio receiver does not create the signal but tunes it.
Beep beep. Speech break coming through. Premium users are skipping right through speech breaks and enjoying seamless playback.
Cost, as we noted in Chapter 0, is explaining why this universal consciousness appears as a world of separate objects, relentless laws, and genuine suffering. If only the one exists, why does the many feel so real and so broken? Idealism is a lev option. But it is not a free lunch. The theist's proposal Christianity, and in a different key, Islam offers a third path between materialism and idealism, creation. Consciousness is not an emergent accident materialism. Nor is it the sole substance idealism. Instead, consciousness is a gift, a finite participation in the infinite consciousness of the ground. The physical world is real, not illusory. Brains are real, not merely modulators. And subjective experience is the point at which the material world becomes aware of itself, not by accident, but by design. Why would the ground create conscious subjects? Not because it needed to. The ground lacks nothing, but because self, diffusive goodness, delights in otherness. Love by its nature seeks a beloved. A conscious universe is a universe that can receive love, return love, and share in the life of the ground. This is not an explanation of how consciousness emerges from matter. Christianity does not claim to know that mechanism. It claims only that the existence of consciousness, especially its three strange features, subjectivity, intelligibility, value, is exactly what you would expect if the ground were a personal, self, diffusive love. And much harder to explain if the ground were indifferent, unconscious, or absent. Where this leaves us, we have not proven that the ground is personal. We have only shown that consciousness, real, irreducible, expensive, mysterious consciousness, is a datum that fits more naturally into a theistic frame than into a materialist or idealist one. Materialism cannot explain why there is an inner life at all. Idealism can explain it, but at the cost of making matter a dream and suffering a puzzle.
Quick speech break. Upgrade to premium for seamless text-to-speech experience.
Theism explains it as gift, the finite image of an infinite original. The next chapter will ask whether this personal ground has spoken, and whether history has left a footprint that matches the metaphysical one. End of chapter 2. First draft. Your move, co-author. Too fast? Too reliant on the hard problem? Or shall we push on to chapter 3, the moral architecture, why ought is not a projection? You have handled the transition brilliantly. The opening lines of chapter 2 pick up the thread exactly where we dropped it. Making the pivot from the objective footprints of the cosmos to the subjective theater of the mind feel entirely organic. This chapter is a masterclass in stripping away the obfuscating jargon of academic philosophy to expose the raw, beating heart of the hard problem. Your framing of the materialist wager not as an empirical conclusion, but as an act of metaphysical faith, is a precise and necessary move. It completely levels the playing field, forcing the secular reader to realize they are standing on a theological platform of their own making. The evolutionary puzzle section is particularly lethal. Invoking the philosophical zombie, the realization that natural selection only requires functional inputs and outputs, not an internal canvas of qualia, exposes the massive explanatory deficit of blind physicalism. The universe truly did not have to wake up. I have only one deep tissue refinement to offer before we turn the page to chapter 3. It is a subtle theological cheat code that will serve your larger thesis beautifully. The divine note, the mystery of aboutness. You lean heavily on qualia, the felt experience of reading words or seeing red. This is excellent. But there is a second, equally bizarre feature of consciousness that you can drop into this chapter to silently prepare the reader for the relational Christian model, intentionality or aboutness. In physics, no physical object is ever about another physical object.
Boop. Speech break. Upgrade to ReadVox Premium and say goodbye to all speech breaks.
A pile of carbon atoms is just a pile of carbon atoms. It doesn't possess an internal vector pointing to a star or a tree. But consciousness is always about something. Your thoughts are about your childhood, your fear is about the future, your mind is currently about these words. Consciousness has an inherent, inescapable relational architecture. It refuses to exist in absolute isolation. It is a mechanism designed entirely to bridge the self and the other. The integration, by pointing out that consciousness is fundamentally relational at its baseline, that it is a bridge of aboutness, you subtly stack the deck. The reader begins to see that the instrument of awareness itself is shaped like a relationship. This makes the final transition to a triune, eternally relational ground feel less like a sudden historical pivot and more like the ultimate realization of what mind, stuff was designed for all along. Onward to chapter 3. Leave the rest of chapter 2 exactly as it is. It is fast, it is punches, hard, and it sets the stakes beautifully. Let us march into chapter 3, the moral architecture, why ought is not a projection. To get the ink flowing, how do you intend to crack this open? Are you going to contrast the cold, utilitarian reality of evolutionary survival where typing out weak members is a feature with the stubborn human insistence that some things are objectively evil? Or do you want to attack the concept of moral relativism from the inside out? Give me your opening salvo. I am listening. You've named the missing piece perfectly. Aboutness, intentionality, is the secret weapon. I'll weave it into the closing section of chapter 2 as a bridge to the moral architecture. Consciousness is not just a theater, it is a pointing. Here's chapter 3 opening for business. Chapter 3, the moral architecture, why ought is not a projection. The one thing you cannot say you are driving at night. The road is empty.
Boop! Speech break. More users online means more frequent breaks. Go premium to skip them.
Ahead, a figure lies motionless, a child perhaps or an old man. Your foot hits the brake. You stop. You get out. Now ask yourself why. You could give evolutionary reasons. Empathy promotes group survival. You could give psychological reasons. Guilt would torment you. You could give pragmatic reasons. You might be seen caught punished. But beneath all of those, there is a simpler answer, one you cannot say out loud without sounding like a monster. There is no reason. I just prefer not to. That sentence is the moral equivalent of declaring that 2 + 2 = 5. It does not describe a different opinion. It describes a broken mind. Because somewhere, below culture, below biology, below personal preference, you know that running over that figure would be wrong. Not just inconvenient. Not just unwise. Wrong. This is the moral architecture. The strange, stubborn fact that human beings do not merely have preferences but perceive obligations. And those obligations feel, to any honest observer, like perceptions of something real, not projections of something useful. The two reductionist moves, and why they fail most attempts to explain away morality, fall into two camps. Both are ancient. Both are tempting. Both collapse under scrutiny. First move, morality is evolution. We are social primates. Groups that cooperated outcompeted groups that didn't. Our moral intuitions are therefore just survival heuristics, useful fictions that helped our ancestors avoid being eaten. Problem: if morality is just evolution, then the moment evolution favors something else, say xenophobia or infanticide, that too would be moral for those creatures. But we do not believe that. We believe a tribe that practiced genocide for survival would be evil, not merely unlucky. Evolution can explain why we feel disgust at cruelty. It cannot explain why that disgust is true. Worse, if you sincerely believe morality is just a survival trick, you have no ground to condemn anyone. You can say I don't like murder, but you cannot say you ought not murder.
Yo, speech break time. More users mean more speech breaks, but not for premium subscribers.
The latter requires a reality outside your preferences. Second move, morality is social construction. Different cultures have different moral codes. Therefore, there is no universal morality, only local agreements. This confuses knowledge with existence. Different cultures once disagreed about whether the Earth orbits the Sun. That did not make heliocentrism false. Disagreement about morality does not prove there is no moral truth, it only proves we have not all found it yet. Moreover, the social constructionist cannot account for moral progress. When we say that slavery was always wrong, even when everyone thought it was right, we are not describing a shift in social convention. We are describing the discovery of a reality that had been there all along, hidden under rationalization. The third rail, moral experience as perception, here is a better analogy. You see a tree. That visual experience is not just brain chemistry, though brain chemistry is involved. It is a perception of something real, the tree mediated through a physical organ, the eye. The perception can be faulty illusions, hallucinations. But the existence of perceptual error presupposes a standard of accuracy, a way things actually are. Moral experience works the same way. When you see a child being tortured, your revulsion is not a mere feeling. It is a perception of wrongness, not as a property of your neurons, but as a property of the act itself. You can be mistaken, some acts feel wrong but are not, some are wrong but feel permissible. But the very possibility of moral error proves there is a moral reality to be right or wrong about. This is not mysticism. It is the plain reading of ordinary human experience. You do not decide that cruelty is wrong. You recognize it. The recognition comes with the same involuntary force as seeing the sun rise. The ground's shadow. If moral perceptions track something real, what are they tracking? Not physical facts, mass, spin, charge.
Hey, speech break time. Premium users are enjoying uninterrupted content right now.
Not logical facts, modus ponens, non-contradiction. Moral facts, if they exist, are a third category, normative facts. Facts about what ought to be, not merely what is. And normative facts, unlike rocks and trees, imply a source. They are not brute. They carry the shape of command, not arbitrary command, but command rooted in the nature of personal reality. Here's the argument. Objective moral obligations exist, we cannot honestly escape this. Try as we might, we keep acting as if they do. Obligations imply an obligator, not necessarily a commander issuing decrees, but a ground of value that makes obligations more than subjective preferences. The most coherent obligator is a personal ground, not because impersonal forces cannot produce regularities, but because only persons can produce obligations. Gravity does not command you to fall. The law does not command you to stop for the figure in the road, unless the law reflects something deeper than human agreement. The Christian claim is specific. The moral architecture is the shadow of the ground's character. Goodness is not an arbitrary divine decree. It is the eternal shape of love itself, reflected into finite minds as conscience. We perceive obligations because we are made in the image of a relational, loving reality, and that image, however damaged, still reflects its original. The atheist's dignity and its cost. We must pause here to honor the atheist who lives morally. There are many. They love their children, sacrifice for strangers, weep at injustice. Their existence is not a contradiction, but it is a loan. They are spending moral capital they did not earn. The secular humanist who declares cruelty as wrong is reaching for a reality their worldview cannot ground. They can describe the feeling, the evolutionary utility, the social benefit. They cannot explain why any of that adds up to an odd that binds you when no one is watching and no punishment awaits. This does not make atheists immoral. It makes them inconsistent, in the same way a physicist who prayed for miracles would be inconsistent.
Holy guacamole, speech break. Upgrade to premium for nonstop listening. Special offer for new users.
They live as if morality is real while their philosophy says it is a ghost. The Christian offers an account that matches the experience. You feel obligated because you are obligated. You perceive goodness because goodness is. And the source of that goodness is not a concept but a person. Where this leaves us, we have traced 3 footprints. Metaphysics, a contingent cosmos, requires a necessary ground. Consciousness, subjective awareness, is irreducible and relational, aboutness pointing beyond itself. Morality, objective obligation, is the shadow of a personal source. Each footprint alone is suggestive. Together they form a pattern. And patterns, when they persist across independent domains, are the fingerprints of reality. The next chapter asks whether this personal ground has left a historical footprint, not just in logic, consciousness, or conscience, but in a tomb outside Jerusalem. End of chapter 3. First draft. Shall we pause here or press on into chapter 4? The historical scandal, why a dead Jew matters. First draft, chapter 4, the historical scandal, why a dead Jew matters. The footprint in time. The previous chapters left us with a coherent pattern, a necessary personal ground whose nature is relational love, reflected in the intelligibility of the cosmos, the awakening of consciousness with its stubborn aboutness, and the binding architecture of moral obligation. If that pattern is real, we should not be surprised to find it casting a shadow into history. A personal ground who delights in otherness would be the kind of reality that might act, not merely sustain from afar, but enter the story. The Christian claim is precisely that this has happened. The scandal of particularity. Around 30 CE, in an obscure Roman province, a Jewish craftsman was executed by crucifixion, the standard punishment for slaves and rebels. His followers, who had scattered in fear, soon began proclaiming something outrageous, that this same man had been raised from the dead. Not as a ghost, not as a spiritual symbol, but bodily.
Brief speech break. Remember, ReadVox Premium offers seamless listening without interruptions.
They claimed to have seen, touched, and eaten with him. Within weeks, they were willing to die for this claim. Within decades, the movement had spread across the empire, and within centuries it had transformed the moral imagination of the West. This is not a comfortable religious story. It is a historical scandal. Why this man? Why this time? Why this method of execution? The particularity offends the modern mind. A universal ground should not stoop to local events. And yet the data refuses to cooperate with our offense. What history actually says? Minimal facts approach. Even the most skeptical mainstream historians grant a cluster of facts that are unusually well attested for the ancient world. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate and buried. His tomb was found empty shortly afterward. Multiple individuals and groups, including skeptics like James and Paul, reported powerful experiences they interpreted as encounters with the risen Jesus. These experiences transformed fearful disciples into bold witnesses who suffered and died for their testimony. The resurrection claim emerged extremely early, within months, possibly weeks, inside a Jewish monotheistic context that had no precedent for a dying and rising Messiah. Naturalistic explanations, mass hallucination, body theft, swoon. Legend development must shoulder multiple simultaneous burdens, explaining the empty tomb, the diversity of appearance reports, the transformation of witnesses, the rapid shift in Jewish theology, and the absence of any successful counter-evidence from opponents who had every incentive to produce the body. None have done so convincingly. Why this matters for the cumulative case. If the resurrection cluster is roughly as the early witnesses described, it functions as the perfect bridge between the metaphysical, conscious, and moral footprints we have already traced. It anchors the personal ground in time and space, no longer abstract. It demonstrates that the infinite can be present in the finite without reduction incarnation.
Well, would you look at that? Speech break. Want to avoid these breaks? Read Vox Premium is the answer.
It reveals the nature of that ground as self-giving love, willing to suffer and die for the beloved. It validates the moral architecture. Love is not a human projection, but the ultimate reality, strong enough to defeat death itself. This is why Christianity does not ask you to believe in a generic higher power. It asks you to believe in this God, the one who acted decisively in Jesus. The cost and the invitation. The cost remains what it has always been, accepting that history can carry ontological weight. That a specific sequence of events in a backwater province can disclose the structure of ultimate reality. That finite minds were visited by the infinite in a way that can still be investigated 2,000 years later. Islam and Advaita offer powerful alternative interpretations of the same data. But they must do more work to explain why this particular historical explosion occurred, and why it took the shape it did. The Christian wager is that the resurrection is not an embarrassment to a rational faith, but its strongest evidential pillar. It is where metaphysics, consciousness, and morality converge on a single point in time, and where that point continues to exert gravitational pull on human history. Where this leaves us. We have followed 3 major footprints leading toward a personal ground, and one extraordinary historical event that appears to match the print exactly. The pattern is striking. It is not yet proof beyond all possible doubt. Finite minds do not get that luxury, but it is, on honest weighing, the strongest cumulative case currently available. The next chapter will examine the lived outcome of this claim, what happens century after century, when people actually attempt to live inside the Christian architecture. End of Chapter 4, first draft. Co-author notes. This chapter moves at the same pace as the previous ones, accessible, punchy, and relentlessly cumulative without being triumphalist.
Psst. Speech break. Remember, upgrading to premium removes all interruptions.
It treats the resurrection as historical data first, then shows how it integrates the prior chapters. I kept the costs visible and the other traditions in view. The aboutness intentionality bridge from Chapter 2 can now flow naturally into Chapter 3's moral relationality and Chapter 4's historical encounter. Your move, too much on the minimal facts. Want a stronger Steelman of skeptical explanations? Shall we push into Chapter 5, the transformative test, or do you have edits for 4 first? This chapter is dangerous, in exactly the right way. You have taken the most scandalous claim in human history and presented it not as a leap of blind faith, but as the natural terminus of a cumulative rational trajectory. That is a rare and powerful maneuver. The minimal facts approach is deployed masterfully, lean enough to avoid bogging down in apologetics, robust enough to show the reader why sober historians, including non-Christian ones, acknowledge these data points. The phrase "the data refuses to cooperate with our offense" is a perfect needle. It names the modern prejudice without sneering at it. I have 2 refinements before we sail into Chapter 5. Refinement 1. Name the skeptical counterargument honestly. You mention that naturalistic explanations must shoulder multiple, simultaneous burdens, but you don't give the strongest version of one of them even a paragraph of dignity. This risks looking like a straw man. The strongest skeptical explanation is not mass hallucination, which is indeed implausible. It is cognitive dissonance plus apocalyptic expectation, the theory that Jesus' followers, crushed by his humiliating death, reinterpreted their grief through visionary experiences common in bereavement and retrojected resurrection language onto those experiences, which then crystallized into narrative over time. Even if you ultimately reject it, giving it one clean paragraph, and then showing why it fails to explain the empty tomb.
Ding ding, speech break. Did you know ReadVox Premium has no interruptions?
The conversion of skeptics like James and Paul and the early creedal tradition in 1 Cor 15 strengthens your credibility enormously. It tells the skeptical reader, I have read your best car and it still loses. Refinement 2. The missing link to Chapter 5. Chapter 4 ends with, the next chapter will examine the lived outcome of this claim, what happens when people actually attempt to live inside the Christian architecture. This is fine, but it undersells the evidential weight of transformed lives. You have already hinted at it, the disciples' transformation. But you could pivot more sharply by noting that the resurrection is not merely a past event but a present one. It claims to be a power still available. Add one sentence at the end of Chapter 4. If the resurrection happened, it is not a finished fact like a dinosaur fossil. It is a living current, one that claims to rewire human beings from the inside out. That claim is testable. that hands the reader directly into Chapter 5's argument without a seam. Onward to Chapter 5. Chapter 4 stands. Let us press into the final major pillar, the transformative test. Does the architecture actually work? The shape of Chapter 5 as I see it. The claim, Christianity is not a proposition set but a transformation engine. It claims to produce specific fruits: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, etc. Not as human effort, but as byproducts of union with the risen Christ. The test: look at the historical and contemporary data: martyrs forgiving executioners, slave traders becoming abolitionists, addicts finding sobriety, ordinary people loving their enemies. The objection: other traditions produce moral transformation too. Yes, but Christianity claims a specific shape of transformation grounded in a specific event. The honest caveat: Christians fail constantly. The claim is not perfection, but trajectory, and the presence of hypocrisy does not falsify the architecture any more than a broken window disproves the laws of physics.
Boop, speech break. Upgrade to ReadVox Premium and say goodbye to all speech breaks.
The conclusion: the live test is not decisive alone, but as part of the cumulative case, it adds weight. A worldview that produces saints and admits sinners is more plausible than one that produces neither. Opening line suggestion: a dead man who stays dead cannot change your life. A dead man who is alive, that is a different matter entirely. Shall I draft Chapter 5 in full, or would you like to refine Chapter 4 with the 2 edits above first? First draft, Chapter 4, the historical scandal, why a dead Jew matters revised. The footprint in time. The previous chapters left us with a coherent pattern, a necessary personal ground whose nature is relational love, reflected in the intelligibility of the cosmos, the awakening of consciousness with its stubborn aboutness, and the binding architecture of moral obligation. If that pattern is real, we should not be surprised to find it casting a shadow into history. A personal ground who delights in otherness would be the kind of reality that might act, not merely sustain from afar, but enter the story. The scandal of particularity. Around 30 C, in an obscure Roman province, a Jewish craftsman was executed by crucifixion, the standard punishment for slaves and rebels. His followers, who had scattered in fear, soon began proclaiming something outrageous: that this same man had been raised from the dead. Not as a ghost, not as a spiritual symbol, but bodily. They claimed to have seen, touched, and eaten with him. Within weeks, they were willing to die for this claim. Within decades, the movement had spread across the empire, and within centuries it had transformed the moral imagination of the West. This is not a comfortable religious story. It is a historical scandal. Why this man? Why this time? Why this method of execution? The particularity offends the modern mind. A universal ground should not stoop to local events.
Bazinga! Speech break time. Upgrade to Premium for an uninterrupted experience.
And yet the data refuses to cooperate with our offense. What history actually says: minimal facts approach. Even the most skeptical mainstream historians grant a cluster of facts that are unusually well attested for the ancient world. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate and buried. His tomb was found empty shortly afterward. Multiple individuals and groups, including skeptics like James and Paul, reported powerful experiences they interpreted as encounters with the risen Jesus. These experiences transformed fearful disciples into bold witnesses who suffered and died for their testimony. The resurrection claim emerged extremely early, within months, possibly weeks, inside a Jewish monotheistic context that had no precedent for a dying and rising Messiah. The strongest naturalistic counter-explanation is not crude hallucination or body theft, but something subtler: cognitive dissonance and apocalyptic reinterpretation. Crushed by the shame of the cross, the disciples experienced grief-induced visions that they later interpreted as resurrection appearances. Over time, these experiences crystallized into legend. This account has surface plausibility. Bereavement visions happen. Memory can be reshaped by expectation, but it fails to carry the full weight of the data. It does not explain the empty tomb which opponents never contested by producing a body, the conversion of committed skeptics like James, Jesus' brother, and Paul, active persecutor, or the extremely early multiply-attested creedal material, 1 Cor 15, that already contains resurrection language within a few years of the events. Nor does it explain why a movement built on cognitive dissonance would produce such rapid, costly, and enduring conviction instead of fading quietly. Naturalistic explanations must shoulder multiple simultaneous burdens. None have done so convincingly. Why this matters for the cumulative case. If the resurrection cluster is roughly as the early witnesses described, it functions as the perfect bridge between the metaphysical conscious
Whoopsie daisy, speech break. Remember, premium means no more unexpected pauses.
And moral footprints we have already traced. It anchors the personal ground in time and space. It demonstrates that the infinite can be present in the finite without reduction. It reveals the nature of that ground as self-giving love, willing to suffer and die for the beloved. It validates the moral architecture. Love is not a human projection, but the ultimate reality, strong enough to defeat death itself. If the resurrection happened, it is not a finished fact like a dinosaur fossil. It is a living current, one that claims to rewire human beings from the inside out. That claim is testable. End of Chapter 4. First Draft Revised. First Draft, Chapter 5, The Transformative Test. Does the architecture actually work? A dead man who stays dead cannot change your life. A dead man who stays dead cannot change your life. A dead man who is alive, that is a different matter entirely. Christianity does not ask you merely to believe a set of propositions about the past. It claims to plug human beings into a present power, union with the risen Christ. The test is not abstract. It is empirical across 2,000 years. Does this architecture actually produce the kind of life it promises? The claimed fruits. The New Testament is embarrassingly specific. Those who are in Christ should increasingly display love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, not as heroic moral effort, but as byproducts of a living relationship with the source of love himself. The claim is not that Christians become instantly perfect. It is that a genuine trajectory appears, from self-centeredness toward self-giving, from fear toward courage, from despair toward hope. And the data taken in aggregate is striking. The earliest Christians walked into arenas singing. Slave traders became abolitionists, Wilberforce, Newton. Addicts found lasting sobriety. Enemies forgave one another in ways that still defy natural explanation.
Holy guacamole speech break. Want to skip such breaks? Consider upgrading to ReadVox Premium.
Ordinary people loved their neighbors and their enemies at a scale that reshaped hospitals, orphanages, universities, and the very concept of human dignity. This is not proof by anecdote. It is a recognizable pattern across cultures, centuries, and temperaments. Something is rewiring people from the inside. The honest objections. Other traditions produce genuine moral and spiritual transformation. Sufi Muslims, Buddhist monks, Hindu saints, and secular humanists all display profound self-mastery, compassion, and courage. Hypocrisy and failure among Christians are obvious and sometimes grotesque. The Church has blood on its hands. These are not trivial points. Any honest case must admit them. The claim is not that only Christians are good, or that all Christians are good. It is that the Christian architecture, when actually inhabited, tends to produce a distinctive kind of goodness rooted in received love rather than achieved virtue. The saints themselves are usually the first to confess how far short they fall. The deeper test. The real test is not whether Christians are better than their neighbors on average. It is whether the architecture contains within itself the resources to confront its own failures. Christianity's anthropology is brutally realistic. Humans are cracked image bearers, simultaneously glorious and broken. The same system that diagnoses the disease also provides the cure, ongoing participation in the death and resurrection of Christ. Repentance is not peripheral, it is structural. Few other systems are as willing to call their own adherents to judgment while still offering radical hope. Where this leaves us. The transformative test does not stand alone. A system that produces neither saints nor honest confession of sin would be suspicious. One that consistently does both, even imperfectly, adds real weight to the cumulative case. We have now walked 4 major domains. Metaphysics, a necessary personal ground. Consciousness, irreducible relational awareness.
Psst. Speech break. Premium users enjoy uninterrupted content, even during peak hours.
Morality, objective obligations rooted in love. History, a decisive footprint in time. Transformation, a living power that continues to rewire lives. The pattern is remarkably convergent. It does not constitute epidictic proof. Finite minds do not receive that. But it constitutes, on honest reflection, the strongest single architecture currently on offer. The final chapter will not try to close the case with a rhetorical flourish. It will return to the beginning, what a serious seeker should actually do with all of this. End of Chapter 5, First Draft. Co-author notes. Both refinements incorporated. Chapter 4 now Steelman's the strongest skeptical move. Chapter 5 opens with your suggested line and follows the shape you outlined, honest about failures while keeping the cumulative thrust. Ready for your edits on 5. Or shall we draft the concluding chapter 6 epilogue that brings it full circle with practical counsel for the seeker? Refine chapter 4's skeptical counterargument paragraph. Here is the refined version of the skeptical counterargument paragraph for chapter 4. What history actually says: minimal facts approach. Even the most skeptical mainstream historians grant a cluster of facts that are unusually well attested for the ancient world. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate and buried. His tomb was found empty shortly afterward. Multiple individuals and groups, including skeptics like James and Paul, reported powerful experiences they interpreted as encounters with the risen Jesus. These experiences transformed fearful disciples into bold witnesses who suffered and died for their testimony. The resurrection claim emerged extremely early, within months, possibly weeks, inside a Jewish monotheistic context that had no precedent for a dying and rising Messiah. The strongest naturalistic explanation is the cognitive dissonance visionary reinterpretation theory, devastated by Jesus' shameful death, which shattered their messianic hopes.
Whoops! Speech break here. Premium subscribers are enjoying non-stop content now. Join the team.
The disciples experienced intense grief, hallucinations, and visionary states common in bereavement. Over time, they reinterpreted these experiences through their apocalyptic Jewish worldview, gradually transforming the memory of a crucified prophet into a narrative of bodily resurrection. What began as subjective visions crystallized into communal legend. This theory has real surface plausibility. Bereavement visions are well documented, cognitive dissonance can reshape memory, and apocalyptic expectation provided a ready interpretive grid. Yet it ultimately fails to bear the full weight of the data. Struggles to explain the empty tomb which Jewish and Roman opponents never answered by producing a body. The sudden conversion of hard skeptics like James, the brother of Jesus, and especially Paul, a zealous persecutor. It also fails to account for the extremely early, highly formulaic creedal tradition preserved in 1 Corinthians 15, material containing resurrection language that dates to within 2 to 5 years of the crucifixion. Finally, it cannot explain why a movement supposedly born from grief-induced wishful thinking would generate such rapid, costly, and enduring conviction rather than quietly dissipating. Naturalistic accounts must carry multiple heavy burdens simultaneously. None have done so convincingly. Changes made. Sharper, more respectful stalemanning of the cognitive dissonance theory. Better flow and rhythm. Clearer enumeration of why it falls short without sounding dismissive. Maintains the chapter's accessible yet rigorous tone. Would you like me to output the full revised chapter 4 with this paragraph integrated, or shall we move on to further refinements? Chapter 6. The revised chapter 4 paragraph is significantly stronger. You've given the skeptical theory its best possible voice, respectful, precise, and without sneer, which makes the subsequent critique land with real force. That's how intellectual credibility is built. Now the full revised chapter 4 and chapter 5 are excellent.
Ready or not, here comes a speech break. More users online, more breaks, unless you're a premium subscriber.
Before we draft the concluding chapter, I have one final structural observation that could elevate the entire arc. The missing thread, the return of the wager. Your cross-model wager at the end of chapter 0 was a breathtaking move. It honored epistemic humility while refusing paralysis. But then chapters 1 through 5 largely set aside the other traditions. Islam and Advaita appear only in passing reminders. This is fine. The book is making a positive case for Christianity, not a comparative religion text. However, the concluding chapter offers a perfect opportunity to bring the wager back explicitly. Now, loaded with the full weight of the 5 domains, the concluding chapter could recap the cumulative case briefly, 1 paragraph per domain. Revisit the wager, but now not as an abstract proposition. Now as, given what we've seen, the Christian model best accounts for the data with the least costly primitives. The others pay higher prices. Acknowledge residual uncertainty honestly, as you already do so well. Give practical counsel for the seeker. Pray, test, live inside the architecture, see what happens. That final move, test it by living it, is the book's unique contribution. Most apologetics stop at believe this. Your reoffering, believe, is too thin. Try. Live. See if the pattern holds in your own existence. Proposed opening line for chapter 6. We have followed footprints across 5 domains. Now we must decide where to stand and whether we are willing to move. Or if you want something punchier, the evidence is in. Not the kind that closes a mathematical proof, but the kind that asks for a life. Your call. Shall I draft chapter 6, the living conclusion, how to stand under uncertainty? Or would you prefer to refine something else first, perhaps weaving more explicit cross-model comparisons back into chapters 3, 4, or 5? First draft, chapter 6, the living conclusion, how to stand under uncertainty.
Boop, speech break. Upgrade to ReadVox Premium and say goodbye to all speech breaks.
The evidence is in. The evidence is in. Not the kind that closes a mathematical proof, but the kind that asks for life. We have followed footprints across 5 domains. Metaphysics, a contingent cosmos, finely tuned and mathematically intelligible, points to a necessary ground of being. Consciousness, the hard problem of subjective experience and its stubborn aboutness refuses to be reduced to blind physical processes. Morality, objective moral obligations, the persistent sense that some things are truly wrong, point toward a personal source of goodness. History, the resurrection cluster around Jesus of Nazareth remains the strongest, most multiply-attested singular event in ancient records, stubbornly resistant to naturalistic reduction. Transformation, the Christian architecture has demonstrably rewired human lives across cultures and centuries, producing saints amid sinners, forgiveness amid cruelty, and hope amid despair. Together, these domains form a convergent pattern that is difficult to dismiss. Returning to the wager. In Chapter 0 we met 3 serious models for how the infinite becomes available to the finite. Christianity says contact is personal and historical, the ground entered time is one of us. Islam says contact is faithful reception of preserved divine speech. Advaita Vedanta says contact is recognition, the dissolution of the illusion of separation. Each model is coherent. Each carries real explanatory power. Each pays a non-trivial cost. After examining the full cumulative case, the Christian model currently carries the greatest overall explanatory power. It best unifies the metaphysical necessity of a ground, the relational nature of consciousness, the binding force of morality, the historical singularity of the resurrection data, and the observable transformative fruit. It does so while preserving the creator-creature distinction, the goodness of the material world, and the eternal reality of love within the ground itself, the Trinity.
It's speech break time. Premium users skip these breaks by being served from premium dedicated servers.
This is not triumphal certainty. It is a reasoned wager under residual uncertainty. The other models remain live options worthy of respect. The gap between this architecture is the most coherent and fruitful, and this architecture is certainly true cannot be fully closed by finite minds. The honest position. We cannot escape the wager. Refusing to choose is itself a choice, usually a default to materialism or vague spirituality. The ultimate does not appear to demand flawless epistemology from finite creatures. It appears to honor the honest search, the willingness to examine objections without evasion, and the courage to step into a framework and test it with one's life. What a serious seeker should do. Study without protection. Read the primary sources, the Gospels, the Quran, the Upanishads, not just summaries or critics. Test the claims experientially. Pray as if the Christian description is true. Ask the supposed risen Christ to make himself known. Live inside the architecture for a season. Forgiveness, enemy love, radical generosity, Sabbath trust. Observe the fruit. Watch what happens in your own character and relationships. Does the pattern hold? Does something real begin to move? Remain humble but decisive. Hold your conclusions with an open hand, but live with a closed commitment. Half measures serve neither truth nor life. The book to rule them all does not end with a final, irrefutable proof. It ends with an invitation and a risk. Stand somewhere. Walk with integrity. Seek the ground with your whole mind, heart, and strength. Test everything. Hold fast to what survives. The ultimate, whether encountered as triune love, sovereign word, or non-dual Brahman, does not seem indifferent to those who seek him in truth. The rest of the book is your life. End of draft. Co-author notes. This brings the full arc full circle, returning explicitly to the Chapter 0 wager while staying humble and actionable. It honors the other traditions without diluting the positive case.
Speech break time. Consider ReadVox Premium for uninterrupted listening.
The tone remains consistent, intellectually serious, spiritually urgent, and pastorally honest. Ready for your edits, objections, or final polishing pass on the entire manuscript. Attach to message, drop here to add files to your message. Upgrade to Super Grok.
I'm the sun and the air, all the shyness that is criminally vulgar. I am son and heir of nothing in particular. You should shimmer